These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at hartmanreport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at dinovite.com.
Our book today is Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee. This is from the first chapter, Jailbreak Out of History, Harriet. Focus on Amazons, about why we deal with real women as myths, girls who never really existed. Yet and again, all are around us, and that we can't bring ourselves to see. Because seeing through white men's eyes is about non-vision of ourselves. So let's deal with a real Amazon. Think about Harriet Tubman. Take 6 months. In fact, take a year and think. Break it on down. What does it mean to be the most famous new African woman in U.S. history? What does it mean to be stuck in that lie? What's the meaning of being famous while being hidden and disfigured and dissed? Let's jailbreak Harriet Tubman out of white history and place her in Amazon and new African, her story, her people's story. Harriet Tubman's life is a live weapon placed in our minds, showing us what it means to be an Amazon, which is why the capitalist patriarchy has forbidden us to touch on it for so long. In this, maybe for the first time, we can see Amazons as a future force in a clash of peoples and nations, not as myths, but as players in the whole difficult course of world politics. We can also appreciate the bittersweet tang of reality as the peeling away of layers of propaganda and disfigurement which have hidden Harriet from us exposes how much we assume and how little we have known. New African women have already pointed out the significant pattern of Harriet's exclusion. Cultural critic Bell Hooks said recently, if we could recover Ida B. Wells and Harriet Tubman to the extent that we've recovered, say, Zora Neale Hurston, I think that's an important contrast because people want to bury that revolutionary black female history. Historian Deborah Gray White connects Harriet's treatment to a larger pattern in the mainstream history of slavery, in which black women, quote, were reduced to insignificance and largely ignored, end quote. In examining the influential historian Stanley Elkins, she points out, quote, that Elkins seems to omit women altogether was accentuated by his description of slaves whom he identified as part of an American underground, those who never succumbed to Samboism. Among those mentioned were Gabriel, who led the revolt of 1820, Denmark Vesey, leading spirit of the 1822 plot at Charleston, and Nat Turner, an omission conspicuous by its absence, was Harriet Tubman. If Elkins had really been thinking of slaves of both sexes, he would hardly have forgotten this woman who became widely known as the Moses of her people, end of quote. Patriarchal capitalisms, which only want Amazons to be exotic myths about forgotten ages, have hidden Harriet Tubman in her own fame. They both trivialize and exceptionalize her. These are tools of oppressor culture. The stripped down and censored version of her life is told in elementary schools all over the U.S. empire. So much so that everyone thinks they know her story already, although they don't. Harriet Tubman was born in slavery in Maryland around 1820. She escaped to the North when she was 29, but kept returning secretly to the South again and again to help other slaves escape. For this, she became known as Moses. True statements. But by limiting her, it becomes clever propaganda against her and against her people. Where patriarchy has been unable to deny that women do significant things, it denies the full meaning of what we do by trivializing them. Mary Daly, feminist philosopher, traces the enormity of what patriarchy has done to us. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hecate, also known as Artemis and Diana, was sometimes known as Trivia and represented by a three-faced statue. That was also the name used for the intersection of three paths, which in many old cultures were the sites of mystical power. She writes in Gynecology, quote, "In light of the cosmic significance of the term trivia as the crossing of the three roads, and of the goddess who bears this name, contemporary meaning of the term in English should be examined. The English term, which according to Merriam-Webster is derived from the Latin trivium or crossroads, is defined as common, ordinary, commonplace, of little worth or importance, insignificant, flimsy, minor, or slight. Of course, according to patriarchal values, that which is commonplace is of little worth. For in a competitive hierarchical society, scarcity is intrinsic to worth. Thus, gold is more important than fresh air, and consequently, we are forced to live in a world in which gold is easier to find than pure air." End quote. So to trivialize Harriet Tubman, the capitalist patriarchy pictures her as an idealized woman by their definition, who makes a life of helping others. Thus, her deeds are squeezed into women's assigned maternal role as nurturer, helper, and rescuer of men, who then go on to do important things. But Harriet wasn't repping Mother Teresa. She wasn't even any kind of civilian at all. She was a combatant, a guerrilla, a warrior carrying pistol and rifle, fighting in her people's long war for freedom, a war that rocked the foundations of African society, American society, and that has never gone away. Think about what it means to be called Moses, which was the code name other new Africans gave her, and which became Harriet's famous warrior name in the anti-slavery underground. When we check out the Bible, we can see that Moses was a ruthless visionary, someone who forced the boldest changes and risks upon his people so that they could survive, who led them out of captivity. To put it simply, Moses was a leader in a time of war. So too was Harriet Tubman. The book, Jailbreak Out of History by Butch Lee.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, happy Thursday to you. We've got a lot on the program today. There's just a lot going on. First of all, what the hell is a populist anyway? And why does the media continue to call fascist Republicans and sellout Democrats populists? We'll get to that in just a moment. The Republican Party is hating on young parents and babies just to make Democrats look bad. And apparently they're fine with terrorism. Two amazing votes in the House of Representatives yesterday that, frankly, I thought would be at the top of the New York Times and the Washington Post. And I don't think either one of them even made the front page. I've got to tell you about those in a few moments. Are Republicans starting to see through the perpetual election lies and extremism? Maybe, maybe not. I'll tell you the details on that. And a crazy alert. Ron DeSantis' press secretary was duped by a fake story about a homophobic dog on International Day Against Homophobia and transphobia and biphobia. We'll get to that in this first hour. In the second hour, Allison Gill is going to drop by. She's got a brilliant new piece, I believe it was in the Washington Post, about how overturning Roe would be disastrous for women in the U.S. military. We will speak with her about it. And also, CPAC is happening over in Budapest in Hungary right now. Why is the Republican Party taking 2024 marching orders from a foreign dictator, specifically Viktor Orban? We'll talk about that in our second hour. Also in our second hour, Geeky Science. Scientists have finally did a study to find out if taking 10,000 steps a day really matters to your health. The results are surprising. I'll tell you about that in the second hour. Also in our third hour, could another recession cause us to rethink Keynesian economics, or is it going to cause the Democrats to lose? Or will it pass in time for 2024? It's probably going to have an impact in 2022. What do you think that will be? I'll share some thoughts with you. And Kevin Kamps from Beyond Nuclear is going to be with us. They're planning on releasing a whole nother batch of nuclear water off the coast of Japan from Fukushima. What's that going to do to the fish coming to the United States? We'll talk about that in the third hour. But my opening rant today, published over at HartmannReport.com, is titled, "What the Heck is a Populist Anyway?" I was watching MSNBC yesterday afternoon, and the Chiron, the words on the bottom of the screen, they're called Chirons because the company that first came up with the technology to do that back 30 years ago was called Chiron. And anyhow, the Chiron read, "Populist Fetterman wins Pennsylvania primary." And it got me thinking, I remember, a month ago when the French elections were happening, they were calling Marine Le Pen a populist. And I've seen Donald Trump called a populist over and over and over again in our media, as well as Bernie Sanders. So all of which raises the question, why do they use this single word, populist, to describe this whole spectrum of very different kinds of politicians? Is populist simply shorthand or pop news speak for media friendly or for outrageous? I remember they used to call John McCain a populist, or high profile politicians. Well, it turns out there's actually a definition of the word. In fact, there was a whole book written about it by Cass Mudd. It's called Populism, a very short introduction. And, this expert on this sort of thing says that populism is a person who takes a political position or is part of a movement that reflects the needs and desires of the majority of the population, thus the word populism, and is opposed to the interests of an elite minority. And that opposition to the elite is as much a part of being identified as a populist as is the embrace of what the majority of Americans want. So here you got Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz, a couple of days ago, told a conservative Washington, D.C. newspaper, actually it might have been a month or so ago, he said, "I'm a conservative, but I'm also a populist. I am deeply a populist. When it comes to populism, I think the most fundamental and important shift in the last decade in politics is that Republicans have become the party of the working class." Right, so let me get this straight. The guy who votes, along with his entire political party, for trade deals that ship jobs overseas, who votes to raise taxes on working people while cutting taxes on the morbidly rich, who strongly opposes the right of working people to have a union in the workplace, who fights to keep the minimum wage at $7.25 an hour, who is heavily funded by right-wing billionaires and giant multinational corporations, and he supports big employers busting unions. This guy's a populist? There was literally nothing in that list I just read that is supported by the majority of Americans. Literally nothing. Ted Cruz is no populist. But claiming the mantle of populism is pretty much what the Republican Party has been doing ever since the Reagan Revolution. Newt Gingrich, came out and said, yeah, we should always, whenever we refer to Democrats, we should use the word elite. Why? Because to be a populist, you have to be opposed to elites. But the GOP, and no matter how often they want to call Barbara Streisand an elite, as if she were some sort of right-wing billionaire like Charles Koch, doesn't make it so, right? Or Jeff Bezos or whatever. Ain't so. The Republican Party is almost exclusively funded by giant corporations, foreign governments, and the morbidly rich. I mean, it doesn't get any more elite than that. So we need to, stop using the word populist to describe any Republican politician until or unless they've renounced their party or the positions of their party. I mean, you've got a bunch of Republicans who pretend to have done that. Trump pretended to be a populist in the 2015 Republican primary when he called out Republicans during the debate and said that every single one of them wanted to end Social Security and Medicare. That's a populist position, to be opposed to ending Social Security and Medicare. He said that all of the Republicans on the stage wanted to cut taxes on the rich, an elite position. He said that they want to suck up to giant corporations by keeping pay low and keep a steady stream of imports from China coming. He even pretended to walk the talk briefly by raising tariffs on a few random products coming out of China. But his populism, when he actually became president, was just as phony as Ted Cruz's. I mean, he borrowed over $2 trillion from the U.S. Treasury and handed it over to himself and his fellow billionaires while using the Defense Production Act to force workers, low-wage workers, back into meatpacking plants during a deadly pandemic at the barrel of a gun. But there is a lot of real populism in America's history. Teddy Roosevelt was our first populist president in 1901. He was followed by his cousin Franklin Roosevelt as our nation's second populist president. FDR was reelected 3 times. He was president 4 different times because he did the will of the people. Harry Truman followed him, but Harry Truman didn't have that populist thing going because he started an unpopular war, the war in Korea. Then came Eisenhower, Dwight Eisenhower. Dwight Eisenhower was a populist. He kept taxes on the rich at 91%. The majority of the population loved that. He continued FDR's work on the New Deal. He supported labor unions. He built a modern America for the middle class. This is Republican Dwight Eisenhower, the populist. Michael Hiltzik notes in his book on the New Deal that just one of those New Deal programs that FDR had started, that Eisenhower continued, quote, produced, among many other projects, 1,000 miles of new and rebuilt airport runways, 651,000 miles of highway, 124,000 bridges, 8,000 parks, 18,000 playgrounds and athletic fields, 84,000 miles of drainage pipes, 69,000 highway light standards, 125,000 public buildings built, rebuilt, or expanded, and 41,300 schools. Eisenhower went on to add an additional 47,856 miles of freeway. I think you could argue that John Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, Richard Nixon, Jerry Ford, Jimmy Carter, they were all populists because they were all governing, basically doing what the majority of the people of America wanted. It all changed, though, when Reagan came into office and started promoting this lie. He pretended he was a populist. By the way, all those presidents I just named, Nixon, I had Nixon and LBJ in that list. The 2 places where they failed on being populist was the Vietnam War, and they both suffered for it. So anyhow, along comes Reagan, and Reagan says, "Oh yeah, I'm a populist too. I'm going to strengthen the middle class by giving tax cuts to the job creators so they'll create more jobs. Trickle-down economics, supply-side economics, that's the thing." But it was a lie. And ever since Reagan, anytime a Republican tries to pretend they're a populist, they're lying. What the Republicans are actually promoting, when you seriously look at it, is a system of government that merges state and government interests while holding political power by demonizing minorities and foreigners and the powerless. That is literally the dictionary definition of fascism. Republicans aren't populists, they're fascists. Now, on the Democratic side, we've got a problem, too. You got people like, here in Oregon, Kurt Schrader, who voted to blow up Joe Biden's Build Back Better and voted to block Medicare from negotiating drug prices. And he's a Democrat. He's clearly not a populist. He's not doing what the majority of people want. So what is he? I call him a sellout. I don't think Kurt Schrader's a fascist, but I think he's a sellout. If you look at the genuine populists in the Democratic Party, which is the Congressional Progressive Caucus, people like Ro Khanna and Mark Pocan and Bernie Sanders and Pramila Jayapal and Elizabeth Warren, they all want this list. This list of things. These are all things that are supported by more than half of Americans. Accessible low-cost health care for all, free or low-cost college and trade school, modern, well-funded public schools, expanded Medicare and Medicaid, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, higher wages and the right to unionize, comprehensive immigration reform, tight regulation of banks and insurance companies, getting money and other forms of bribery out of politics, returning to Hamilton's American plan to bring our factories back home, paying for American renewal by appropriately taxing the morbidly rich, breaking up corporate monopolies that rip us off and give us terrible service, and ending corporate personhood and returning those rights to the people. Those are populist positions. Where the hell did this word centrist come from? What makes Kurt Schrader a centrist? He's a sellout. So let's just be clear about this. We can simplify our language tremendously. You have populists, they're, a good chunk, probably about half of the Democratic Party, maybe more, and it's growing. You have sellouts, there's some of them in the Democratic Party. And you have fascists, which the Republican Party is well populated by. Let's all encourage the media to start telling the truth about what's going on, eh?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Unless you think I'm missing something here. The whole piece, by the way, with all the links and everything else is over at HartmannReport.com. It's free. And welcome back. Omar in Herndon, Virginia. Hey, Omar. Thanks for listening on the Thom Hartmann app. What's up?
Tom, you don't miss anything. You're the treasurer. You don't miss nothing.
Okay.
Hey. Tom, I don't know if you're aware, but you're on DC and radio now. I don't know if you're aware of that. You're 104.7.
Washington D.C.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
What's the station? What's the call letters?
It's 104.7 FM.
So is that We Act Radio? Did they pick up an FM signal there? Because they used to just be on the internet. Ah, okay.
No, this is a radio. This is a radio station.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, they used to have an FM signal. A bunch of right-wingers challenged it. It got taken down for a little while. They've got it back now. That's great to know. Thank you, Omar.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just crank you up loud and let everybody on the road listen to the messenger.
That's great.
But Tom, what I wanted to talk about is that I think the Democrat needs to take a lesson from John Fetterman's campaign. I'm going to tell you a story. I was driving from Virginia to Ohio, and I stopped in Breezewood Rest Station. And guess who I see? John Fetterman. They're standing.
Wait a minute. Did you say John Fetterman?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
The Lieutenant Governor of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, the guy who's probably going to be the senator. Yeah.
Exactly, but Democrats need to take a lesson from his candidacy. He was sitting there, and he was having a discussion with somebody about Medicare. It was just amazing, and I just saw him down there, and I shook his hand, and I moved on. But he had been planting the seeds from day one. He's constantly talking to people, talking about kitchen sink issue tables, and that's what we have to go back to galvanize our base. And that's just something that we Democrats have to take a note of. But what I want to talk about, Tom, is that this out-of-placement theory, I think Fox News has blood in its hand, and it's time to start targeting.
Fox News has what? I'm sorry?
Has blood on its hand.
I still don't. Let me turn the volume up here a little in my ear. Say it again.
I'm sorry. No, I just said Fox News has blood on its hands.
Oh, blood on its hands. I get it, yeah.
Yes, because this incident that happened in Buffalo was very tragic. I blame Fox News because they propped up this information. I think it's time to start targeting the advertisers, people who advertise on Fox News.
And that's already happening. I mean, there's very few advertisers left, for example, for some of their shows. The problem is that most of their money doesn't come from advertising. It comes from the what are called carriage fees. When cable networks carry television networks, they have to pay the television networks, and Fox gets most of its money from cable carriage fees. So they don't care.
Well, but this is equivalent of screaming fire in the movie theater.
I agree.
This is inciting violence, and FCC have to step in because they cannot continue to press. They literally just displaying hate.
The FCC doesn't. The problem is the FCC doesn't regulate cable.
Wow. Okay.
Frankly, I think that could happen. I mean, you could build a case that cable is, the whole idea of the FCC regulating the airwaves is that that's public space. The radio frequency spectrum is publicly owned. And most cable operators are running their cable across public property that runs along roads and rights of way and things like that, and which was the rationale that was used for regulating the phone companies. So it should be possible. It's just going to take an act of Congress to make it happen. And that has not happened to the best of my knowledge. Omar, thanks a lot for the call. I got to run. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Are the Republican voters starting to see through the perpetual election lies and extremism? And what happened in Congress yesterday? This is such a big deal. I don't understand why it's not at the top of the news. We'll be right back. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So if you want to know what the Republicans are for, you'll recall, President Biden recently in his one-year anniversary of becoming president speech said that, who would have imagined that all they were in favor of doing was just obstructing anything I'm doing. And then he went on to say, what are the Republicans for? What does Mitch McConnell stand for? Chris Sununu, the governor of New Hampshire, actually went and talked with a number of Republican senators when he was thinking about running for the Senate, asked them, what are you guys doing? And they said, we're just here basically obstructing Biden. That's all we're doing. And Sununu said, screw that. I'm not going to run for the Senate then. He said they were all, for the most part, content with the speed at which they weren't doing anything. It bothered me that they were okay with that. So then, Mitch McConnell got asked by an NBC, Leanne Caldwell at NBC, what are you guys going to do if you get elected? And McConnell said, I'll tell you after the election. This is nuts. We got a video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. So this just blows my mind. Just a moment ago, Omar from Virginia called in and said, Fox News has blood on their hands with regards to the Buffalo shooter. And then, this story, this is published over at rawstory.com. The headline, Michigan teen hoped school massacre would help get Biden impeached. No, I'm not making this up. I'll just read it to you straight. A Michigan teenager who killed 4 classmates and injured 7 other people hoped that his school massacre would lead to Joe Biden's impeachment. He wrote in his journal, quote, hopefully my shooting will cause Biden to get impeached. Sleepy effing Joe Biden will have to make an apology to the people. This is the kid whose parents are also in jail. His mother had written this love letter to Donald Trump when he was president. It's amazing. So what happened in the House of Representatives yesterday? Well, there was a bill to appropriate $28 million, which, $28 million is like, what? 8 minutes of spending by the federal government. It's not a lot of money. But when you've got baby formula, it is a lot of money, right? So to appropriate $28 million in emergency funds to buy baby formula from outside the country and bring it in and move it around and make it available. 219 Democrats voted yes. Only 12 Republicans voted yes. 192 Republicans voted no. We don't want to help out young parents. Why is that not at the top of the New York Times and the Washington Post? What am I missing here? I mean, if Democrats had made it as insane a vote as that, and then at the same time, the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act of 2022, this would share information about domestic terrorism among government departments and combat white supremacism and neo-Nazi infiltration of the uniformed services and federal law enforcement. 203 Republicans voted no. 222 Democrats voted yes. When did terrorism become something that the Republicans were in favor of? What am I missing here? Extremism has now seized the GOP. There's no other way to say this. Racism, racial hatred, right-wing extremism, hate of government itself has seized one of our 2 major parties. And now they're going over to Hungary, and a dictator, the Hungarian dictator, Viktor Orban, is telling them, oh yeah, we've got to seize the media. I'll tell you more about that in the next hour. But it's just, this is incredible. Your call's up next. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Actually, just a touch more on Republican extremism. Then your call's next on the other side of this break. We'll be right back. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Meat Racket, The Secret Takeover of America's Food Business by Christopher Leonard. This is from the prologue. It's titled The Hidden King. Nobody ever visits the stranded little community of Waldron, Arkansas. But even if they did, a tourist would never see the place for what it really is. Most outsiders would be fooled into thinking it was an actual small town. On any given morning, the residents awaken and begin their routine along Main Street. Old men park their pickup trucks by the curb in front of the Rock Cafe, which opens early for breakfast. As the cafe's booths and tables fill up, a congregation of old-timers in cowboy hats gathers in a loose ring of aluminum chairs out front, smoking and talking and stubbing out their cigarette butts in a bucket full of sand. Later in the morning, Chambers Bank in the south end of town opens up, and the tellers cheerfully greet customers by name. On Thursday at noon, the livestock auction opens in a cavernous barn on the north side of town, drawing crowds of ranchers who haul steel trailers behind their trucks with cows staring out between the horizontal slats. In the late afternoon, teenagers park their cars by the gazebo south of the auction barn, proudly displaying their Mustangs and Broncos like big game trophies. These events have a rhythm of their own, the clockwork functioning of a small-town economy. But it's all just window dressing. All of it would cease to exist in a moment and have no impact whatsoever on the true Waldron or its true economic reason for being. The real tempo of the town's economic pulse is measured by the coming and going of semi-trucks that roll down Main Street at periodic intervals, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. In the middle of the night, tanker trucks full of animal feed rumble past the empty stores and out onto country roads that lead into the hilly terrain that surrounds town. At dawn, other trucks trundle in from the hills, heaped high with battered metal crates full of chickens that exude clouds of white feathers along the highway. The tempo can be measured in the regular arrival of train cars full of grain and oil seeds that dump their loads at a feed mill that clanks and hums and churns all night. And in the parade of refrigerated trucks that pull up to a slaughterhouse near the feed mill and get loaded with pallets of frozen meat. This is the real functioning of Waldron, Arkansas, and its true reason for being. This is the heartbeat of Tyson Foods, the nation's biggest meat company. The Tyson plant on the north end of Waldron is the only thing that keeps the town on the map. Appropriately, many residents simply refer to it as the complex. That's because the Tyson plant isn't just a factory, it's more like an entire small-town economy consolidated into one property. The complex contains its own feed mill and hatchery, its own trucking line and slaughterhouse that covers several acres of land and processes about 1 million dead chickens a week. The complex is like an economic dark star that has drawn into itself all the independent businesses, an economic dark star that has drawn into itself all the independent businesses that used to define a small town like Waldron, the kinds of businesses that were once the economic pillars of rural America. Of course, tourists to Waldron would never see the Tyson plant, and not just because it sits on the north fringe of town away from Main Street. Visitors are stopped at its front gate and forbidden from exploring its grounds. So a tourist would have to be content to stroll along the sidewalks downtown, observing the fake Main Street, the deceptive array of little businesses that make it seem like a community. This illusory appearance cloaks Tyson's existence all the way from its roots in rural America to the grocery store shelves and restaurant menus where its products finally reach American consumers. The average shopper is usually fooled when he or she peruses the meat aisle, seeing what appears to be an abundance of choices and products. Tyson brand name wouldn't necessarily stand out with its logo gracing just a handful of products. But the rotisserie chicken slowly turning in its oven, the Bonisi brand pepperoni, the Lady Astor brand chicken cordon bleu, the frozen chicken pot pie, and the Wright brand bacon all come from the same company, Tyson. And then there is all the unlabeled meat that Tyson floods into the U.S. food system every day. The meat served in cafeterias, nursing homes, fast food restaurants, and suburban eateries where more and more Americans eat their meals. there's a very good chance any of the meat purchased in these places was made by Tyson. Even if Tyson did not produce a given piece of meat, the consumer is really only picking between different versions of the same commodified beef, chicken, and pork that is produced throughout a system that Tyson pioneered. Tyson's few competitors have resorted to imitating the company's business model just to survive. This book aims to explore the vast hidden territory between the remote farms and towns like Waldron, where Tyson raises millions of animals, and the final point of contact where consumers buy the company's meat. Unseen between these two poles is a hidden power structure that has quietly reshaped U.S. rural economies while gaining unprecedented control over the nation's meat supply. Just a handful of companies produce nearly all the meat consumed in the United States, and Tyson is the king among them. The company sits atop a powerful oligarchy of corporations that determines how animals are raised, how much farmers get paid, and how meat is processed, all while reaping massive profits and remaining almost entirely opaque to the consumer. Because Tyson and its imitators are based in the geographic and economic fringes of America in forgotten places like Waldron, the company has managed to escape the scrutiny it deserves. While Tyson's operations are remote, the company's business practices affect virtually everyone. About 95% of Americans eat chicken, which means they almost certainly eat chicken produced by Tyson. And then it goes on from there. The book is The Meat Racket, The Secret Takeover of America's Food Industry by Christopher Leonard. By Ocean Robbins.
Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Welcome back. So, a lot going on here. This new study. This is an amazing new study. The Republican Party, just white nationalism, extremism within the GOP. This new study that just came out. The Republican Party in the past year has fielded over 100 extremist candidates. This is the Institute for Research and Education on Human Rights, and they did this study looking at extremist Facebook groups, these private groups. And what they found was that 875 legislators in all 50 states, constituting nearly 22% of all elected Republican lawmakers, identified as participating members of extremist groups. They identify 875 of them. This is just incredible. It's 21.74% of all Republican lawmakers in the country. The states with the highest percentage of extremist legislators were Alaska, Arkansas, Idaho, Montana, Washington, Minnesota, Maine, and Missouri. The report connects them with the surge in legislation seeking to limit access to the ballot, restrict the right of LGBTQ people, limit critical race theory, and otherwise control what public school children can learn about America's legacy of racism, as well as severely restricting abortion rights in their states. Those are the criteria for extremism. The head of that study, a person by the name of Burkhout, said all of that stuff has been incubated in these networks. The report also identifies some 963 different pieces of legislation introduced in all 50 states and at the federal level that are what they describe as anti-human rights bills. They added, by the way, the researchers, the IREHR researchers added, quote, "We believe the findings almost certainly understate the breadth of the problem." Meanwhile, Donald Trump's election lies, Maggie Haberman in the New York Times is saying Trump's dangerous election lies might blow up the Pennsylvania Republicans, blow up in their faces. I mean, he was impeached twice. He attempted to shake down Ukraine. He tried to incite a riot. He did incite a riot, in fact. And then, a couple of weeks ago, Trump came out in one of his speeches and he says, should they expunge the impeachment in the House? Well, you can't expunge an impeachment. First of all, he wasn't convicted, so you can't, expunge a conviction. And secondly, because it's not a criminal proceeding, and it's part of the public record. But nonetheless, Oklahoma Republican, right-winger, hardcore crackpot Mark Wayne Mullen who is running for the U.S. Senate in Oklahoma, proposed a resolution in the House of Representatives declaring Trump's first impeachment is expunged. Yeah. And finally, a crazy alert. Ron DeSantis' press secretary, this was yesterday, the International Day Against Homophobia, Transphobia, and Biphobia, retweeted a photoshopped Washington Post page. It was satire with this poofy-looking dog saying, there's a homophobic dog. Hates gay people. Isn't that cool? Right. In a statement to the Independent newspaper on Wednesday, the British newspaper, The Independent, she said, quote, "The fact that the Washington Post felt the need to fact-check a satirical meme says a lot about the credibility of the Washington Post, and none of it good. Washington Post journalists would be happier if they stopped taking themselves and social media so seriously." Maybe she should stop taking, tweeted BS memes so seriously. Amazing. Andre in Chicago. Let's pick up your phone calls here. Andre in Chicago. Hey, Andre, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how you feel today?
Good. What's up?
Good. Thanks for asking. Look, I want to say that, first of all, many of these congressmen call themselves to be Catholic, but their behavior is totally opposite than what they claim their faith is. I honestly think that there's more good people. No matter what we go through, I think there's more good people in the world than there are bad people, but we are rendered null and void because we don't speak out. And the only way you can counteract some things is to speak out. I think it was Dr. King that said silence is consent, and it's not so much what happened to us, but it's the deafening silence behind the victimization that we experienced. So I think it's time for the evangelicals to speak out, the Catholics to speak out, and talk to their kids as well. Initiate conversations with your kids about critical race theory. Initiate conversation with your kids about racism, hateism, and white supremacy. Don't wait for kids to initiate the conversation to you. Monitor your kids' behavior. Monitor the company that your kids keep. And I think that we have a chance of warding this stuff off the path. So many times we've heard people say, well, I had no idea she was doing this. Well, I had no idea my son was this. It's like they're in the dark. You spend your money buying your kids cell phones and tablets and letting them go on the internet, then you got a right to monitor what they're doing, and you can hear some things off the path. We talk about Joe Manchin. I think it's time for the Democratic Party to rebuild themselves and say, the heck with Joe Manchin. We can't be bullied for the rest of our lives with Joe Manchin hanging over our head.
Yeah.
It'd be nice if
it's going to take another 2 years, I think.
Yeah, well, it'd be nice if we can find somebody that could take a popular figure that could take a residence there in Virginia, West Virginia, and run against Joe Manchin, and don't be afraid to lose. But he got to be called out. He can no longer walk this line between Democrat and Republican. And if he's taking Democratic resources like Democratic money from the party, or he's using Democratic volunteers, then they need to cease and desist with helping him with these type of things.
Well, the immediate problem, though, is if Joe Manchin were to leave the Democratic Party, Chuck Schumer is no longer running the Senate. I mean, there's a practical piece to this, Andre. But I get what you're saying, and there's a strong movement in West Virginia, as there is in Arizona with regard to Kyrsten Sinema, to replace both of them in the primaries 2 years from now. And I think Manchin, I think, frankly, is probably going to retire. Although, who knows? I mean, power is very, very addictive.
Thank you for saying that, but I just feel like we may have to. We got to start somewhere. We can no longer keep killing all these packages. Who knows if Joe Biden will win in 24? We have to deal with these things when we can, and don't be afraid to take risks. Tom, do you know why it is, or have you heard anything about why Nancy Pelosi and any of these other congressmen that were threatened hadn't filed lawsuits against these people that threatened them? I don't know if it was Marjorie Taylor Greene or people that said hang Nancy Pelosi. Or why did they just let the Congress take over that instead of them filing personal suits against these people? I believe that would have made a difference if they filed some individual lawsuits against these people for threatening them like that.
I think they're trying to let the legal process work its way through, Andre, and don't want to get in the middle of that. If you filed a civil lawsuit like that, you would have discovery, and the discovery would have you looking at the same witnesses that they're looking at, and it could get real messy. So my guess is that's what's going on. So Andre, thanks a lot for the call. It's great to hear from you. Richard in Orlando. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I don't know if you know who Tim Snyder is.
Sounds familiar.
He's come up with, he's a history professor at Yale who's.
Oh, Tim Snyder, yeah. He's been on the show.
Yeah.
I've read 2 of his books, yeah.
Okay, well, he's come up with a refinement on the populism idea. He calls it sadopopulism, as sadomasochism.
Mm-hmm.
And he says sadopopulism is the administration of pain, deliberate pain, like take away your health care, screw up your education, like all the red states, how they all their government does nothing for them.
Deny people access to Medicaid, yeah.
Right. Then redirect that pain. You have a reservoir of pain, and you redirect it toward the scapegoats of your choice. Who's making the pain, right? What's the biggest problem? Oh, my God, they're coming to take away our white privilege, and it's anybody from, is it George Soros or Nancy Pelosi, so you can redirect that pain. And as long as you can fool the people and make them think that, what Lyndon Johnson said, if you can convince the lowest white man that he's better than the highest black man, you can pick his pocket
all day long. Yep. There you go, Richard. And these guys are over in Hungary right now taking lessons on how to do this from a guy who pulled it off, Viktor Orban. He's rigged his elections. He's seized complete control of the media. I mean, it's an ongoing process. It really is.
They have no policy, but when somebody asked McConnell what the policy was if they won back the Senate, and he said, well, we'll tell you when we get there, they have no policy, so... Yeah.
Well, they do now. Rick Scott has laid out his 11-point plan, which includes sunsetting Social Security and Medicare after 5 years and raising taxes on the bottom half of American wage earners. So we'll see how that works out for them, Richard. We'll see. I'm not optimistic about their chances. I think it's going to hurt them badly. Dan, thanks for the call, Richard. Dan in Oxford, Alabama. Hey, Dan, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom.
Hello, Dan.
Sadly, as we all know, right-wing extremists with an AR-15 walked into a grocery store in Buffalo, New York, and took some very good people off this earth because the only reason was they had black skin.
Yep.
Now, let me back up here to where I live here in Alabama. We've got elections here as well.
Yeah, next week is your primary, isn't it? Next Tuesday?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody that's running, and I'm talking about campaign ads here, and these are all Republican. Every single one of these folks are Republicans. Every single one of these people are pro-Trump, including the incumbent governor, Kay Ivey. I mean, they're all pro-Trump this, pro-Trump that, and they make sure that gets out there to the population. They're all holding a gun in their hand, including a lady that's running for the Alabama Supreme Court. And part of her campaign ad is showing her firing an automatic pistol at a target.
Wow.
And they all say pro-gun. I mean, every single one of them's got a gun in their hand of some kind or another. And, I'm thinking, you got a fire in this country going on in racial hatred and bigotry, and these people are pouring gasoline on that fire.
Yeah, I agree.
And, I guess you can figure out I am not GOP by any stretch of the...
I remember when there was a time when this kind of thing used to provoke outrage. Remember when Sarah Palin tweeted that photo of the targeted campaign areas around the country with the crosshairs, and one of them was Gabby Giffords, and then Gabby Giffords got shot in the head a week later? There was all kinds of uproar about that. No more uproar anymore, Dan.
No, and to be honest with you, I'm a former Marine, a Vietnam vet, and I understand. I understand the Second Amendment. What I don't understand is why this country, I know why it's flooded with military assault weapons. They let the assault weapons ban die in Congress in 1996, which was an idiotic thing to do.
Yep.
But it was also a planned thing to do by the Republicans to make sure their buddies in the NRA and the gun manufacturers made a fortune, which they're doing. Unfortunately, it's cost them a lot of lives.
Yeah, didn't it pass in '96 under Clinton, and then George W. Bush let it expire in 2006? Or am I remembering wrong?
Yeah.
Because I don't think it would have passed in '86 under Reagan, and it was passed through reconciliation, so it only lasted 10 years.
There is no rational explanation that anyone on this earth can give me for owning an AK-47 or an AR-15, especially if it's a fully automatic weapon. There is no way in the world you can convince me that someone needs that kind of gun.
Yeah, unless they're planning on starting a war or murdering a whole lot of people, which, sadly is more and more of what's going on. Dan, thank you for the report from Alabama. It's good to hear from you, and I do appreciate it. This is where the Republican Party is at. They're the party. They have become the party, the anti-American party. They've become the party of take down America, let's tear down this country, and if necessary, have a war in the process. We'll be back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Exposing the con in conservative. I'll be right back. And welcome back. Joe in Seattle. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind today?
Oh, I've been thinking about populism, but now you've been talking about white supremacy and neo-Nazism, and I kind of want to speak on that now, too.
Go for it.
My first point was that the Democrats and the Republicans, a lot of them are supporting this war in Ukraine. And I feel like that's an anti-populist position because the majority of American people are not supportive of the war.
Not true. Not true. Look at any public opinion polling, and it's
from
just
a
not
Forbes
true.
article a few days ago, says Americans overwhelmingly don't want the U.S. to risk war with Russia and aiding Ukraine.
Well, that's a completely different thing. That's literally a completely different thing. That's the whole point, is let's not risk war with Russia. But that doesn't mean the majority of Americans don't want the United States giving military aid to Ukraine. The majority of Americans do. That's unambiguous, Joe.
Do you think the majority of American people want $40 billion given to a proxy over there that supports neo-Nazis?
I do. And they don't support neo-Nazis. The neo-Nazis are here in the United States.
Do you know the connection between Azov and the neo-Nazi movement in the United States?
I know that there are right-wingers in both countries, Joe. What does that have to do with anything?
They're not right-wingers. They're supported. They're openly neo-Nazis.
I'll give you. There are people in both countries. There are people Germany has neo-Nazis. There's, Joe, if you're going to try and spout Russian Putin's propaganda on my show, I'm going to cut you off.
I'm talking about right-wing neo-Nazis that are supported by the U.S. government.
Yeah. Joe, take it someplace else. Really, take it someplace else. David in San Francisco. Hey, David, what's on your mind?
Howdy, Tom. I was more interested in food issues. If the Ukrainian farmers don't get in a crop probably this week, summer wheat needs planting, and it's a little late for that. If they don't get in a crop this year, the world is in some real trouble. And I heard you talking about Ted Cruz a little while ago. That guy is trying to play both sides against the middle. He must have been a speech on the floor of the Senate about the importance of supporting the Ukraine, but he didn't want to support the sanctions. And, if you think about corporate takeovers, you think about Republicans being able to crush a corporation and snap it up themselves, you would think that the Republicans would know how to crush Putin without even a whimper. You just pull it off and get down the road with the money. They've been doing that sort of stuff for years, but they don't want to help. So there were two things in the news. You know, these the stock market collapses in the last couple of days. You wonder whether or not actually the sanctions are working, and that Putin's people are having to do a flea market sale, a yard sale, in order to raise cash. So they were selling in order to raise cash, or whether or not the Republicans are trying to crash the economy so they can help Putin.
I don't think there's a relationship there outside of the possibility of a food crisis coming that is affecting the market. I think the big issue is that we've been juicing the market for years now, and the Fed just pulled back in a huge way. I mean, a half-point drop. I think that's where it's going. David, thank you for the call. Share the Thom Hartmann program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann program. The New York Times has put together just an amazing graphic where they took all the record temperatures from last year, from 2021, and put the red ones being hot and blue ones being cold, put them as little dots on a map of the United States. And it sure looks to me like what we're seeing is the collapse of the jet stream. If you watch weather shows on TV and things like that, what you see is, some very off. Well, we saw this, for example, with that cold snap last a year ago, February, where the jet stream just kind of drooled all the way down, carried Arctic air all the way down into southern Texas and northern Mexico, froze Texas up, shut down their power systems and things like that. And it's blocking the movement of air here in the Pacific Northwest, and thus we're getting these massive heat waves. I think that we all need to keep an eye on this. I've got a video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. You can check it out there. Welcome back. 54 minutes past the hour, picking up your calls. Michael in Greenville, South Carolina. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind?
Good day, Tom, and thank you, Joyce, for making me the unofficial president of her fan club.
Okay. The Joyce fan club. That's cool. So what's up?
Yeah, but the elephant in the room, the reason why I believe that there are all of these hate crimes and everything else is because of Barack Obama.
Because a black man became president and it triggered the white supremacists? Is that what you mean?
Bingo. Yeah. Bingo.
Yeah.
Well,
that was, the whole birther thing, that was Trump's entree into politics.
Yeah. I know that you watch Fareed Zakaria.
Religiously.
Years ago, there was a scholar on with him, and he predicted exactly what was going to happen.
Yeah. That there would be a massive white backlash to a black president.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's backlash to the extreme.
Yeah. Yeah. I get it. I get it, Michael. I think you're absolutely right. And, but at the moment, it's water under the bridge.
I have to chide you and everyone else in the media for never realizing this.
Well, I've pointed this out more than once. They went nuts when Obama became president. That was when they funded the whole Tea Party thing. To try to take him down. That's when Trump went birther. It's like the entire Republican Party went insane, and it just got worse and worse and worse. And then boom, what'd you get? Donald Trump.
Now we have shooters in grocery stores.
Yeah, well, we've had shooters, we've had racist shooters for a long, long time. Tim McVeigh back in the 90s when Bill Clinton was president, blew up the Oklahoma federal building because he wanted to start a race war.
I thought of that when I was thinking about my thoughts, but because of Barack Obama It just...
No, it's not because of Barack Obama. It's in reaction to the presidency of Barack Obama. Barack Obama did not cause any of this. Barack Obama was president. These people's racism caused this. Let's be very clear in our language here, Michael. Michael, thank you for the call. We'll be right back with more of your calls. Well, and more of the news of the day. Allison Gill, in fact, is going to drop by on the other side of this break.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at hartmanreport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at dinovite.com.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club, and today we're reading from Arundhati Roy's brilliant book, Capitalism, A Ghost Story. This is from the afterword at the very end of the book. Yesterday morning, the police cleared Zuccotti Park, but today the people are back. The police should know that this protest is not a battle for territory. We're not fighting for the right to occupy a park here or there. We're fighting for justice. Justice is not just for the people of the United States, but for everybody. What you've achieved since September 17th, when the Occupy movement began in the United States, is to introduce a new imagination, a new political language into the heart of the empire. You've reintroduced the right to dream into a system that tried to turn everybody into zombies, mesmerized into equating mindless consumerism with happiness and fulfillment. As a writer, let me tell you, this is an immense achievement. I cannot thank you enough. We are talking about justice. Today, as we speak, the Army of the United States is waging a war of occupation in Iraq and Afghanistan. U.S. drones are killing civilians in Pakistan and beyond. Tens of thousands of U.S. troops and death squads are moving into Africa. If spending trillions of dollars of your money to administer occupations in Iraq and Afghanistan is not enough, a war against Iran is being talked up. Ever since the Great Depression, the manufacture of weapons and the export of war have been key ways in which the United States has stimulated its economy. Just recently, under President Obama, the United States made a $60 billion arms deal with Saudi Arabia. It hopes to sell thousands of bunker busters to the United Arab Emirates. It has sold $5 billion worth of military aircraft to my country, India, my country, which has more poor people than all the poorest countries of Africa put together. All these wars, from the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki to Vietnam, Korea, Latin America, have claimed millions of lives. All of them fought to secure the, quote, American way of life, end quote. Today we know that the American way of life, the model that the rest of the world is meant to aspire toward, has resulted in 400 people owning the wealth of half the population of the United States. It has meant thousands of people being turned out of their homes and jobs while the U.S. government bailed out banks and corporations. American International Group alone was given $182 billion in the bailout. The Indian government worships U.S. economic policy. As a result of 20 years of the free market economy, today 100 of India's richest people own assets equal to 1/4 of the country's GDP, while more than 80% of Indian people live on less than 50 cents a day. 250,000 farmers driven into a spiral of death have committed suicide. We call this progress and now think of ourselves as a superpower. Like you, we are well qualified. We have nuclear bombs and obscene inequality. The good news is that people have had enough and are just not going to take it anymore. The Occupy movement has joined thousands of other resistance movements all over the world in which the poorest of people are standing up and stopping the richest corporations in their tracks. Few of us dreamed that we would see it, the people of the United States on our side, trying to do this in the heart of empire. I don't know how to communicate the enormity of what this means. The 1% say we don't have demands. They don't know, perhaps, that our anger alone would be enough to destroy them. But there are some things, a few pre-revolutionary thoughts I had for us to think about together. We want to put a lid on this system that manufactures inequality. We want to put a cap on the unfettered accumulation of wealth and property by individuals as well as corporations. As capitalists and Liddites, we demand, 1, an end to cross-ownership in business. For example, weapons manufacturers cannot own TV stations. Mining corporations cannot run newspapers. Business houses cannot fund universities. Drug companies cannot control public health funds. 2, natural resources and essential infrastructure, water supply, electricity, health, and education cannot be privatized. 3, everybody must have a right to shelter, education, and health care. 4, the children of the rich cannot inherit their parents' wealth. This struggle has reawakened our imagination. Somewhere along the line, capitalism reduced the idea of justice to mean just human rights. The idea the idea of dreaming of equality became blasphemous. We're not fighting to tinker with reforming a system that needs to be replaced. As a capist and a Lidite, I salute your struggle. Salam and Zimbad Dad. That's the end of the book. This is from the very opening of it, chapter 1. Is it a house or a home, a temple to the new India, or a warehouse for its ghosts? Ever since Antilla arrived in Altamont Road in Mumbai, exuding mystery and a quiet menace, things have not been the same. Here we are, the friend who took me there said. Pay your respects to our new ruler. Antilla belongs to India's richest man, Mukesh Ambani. I'd read about this most expensive dwelling ever built, the 27 floors, 3 helipads, 9 lifts, hanging gardens, ballrooms, weather rooms, gymnasiums, 6 floors of parking, and 600 servants. Nothing had prepared me for the vertical lawn, a soaring 27-story high wall of grass attached to a vast metal grid. The grass was dry in patches, bits have fallen off in neat rectangles, clearly trickle down hadn't worked. But gush up certainly has. That's why in a nation of 1.2 billion, India's 100 richest people own assets equivalent to 1/4 of the GDP. And then Arundhati Roy goes on from there talking about how India is kind of an example of capitalism run amok. Capitalism, a Ghost Story by Arundhati Roy.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. You know, we've been talking about the whole Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade and the possibility that individual states are going to start, well, the certainty that individual states are going to start criminalizing abortion and criminalizing women who get them and people who help them and physicians and whatnot. But we haven't really talked much at all on this program or in the media in general, frankly, about American citizens who are actually putting their lives on the line for other American citizens who don't have the luxury of moving to another state or even, you know, hopping on a plane to go to another state to get an abortion if they end up stuck in one of these states that criminalizes abortion. And I think this is a big deal. Allison Gill is on the line with us. Allison is the host of Mueller, She Wrote, up at the podcast, and also the host of The Daily Beans, a woman-owned and operated progressive news podcast. Allison is also a Navy veteran with a PhD in health administration. MuellerSheWrote.com and DailyBeansPod.com are the websites, and Mueller, She Wrote, or Daily Beans Pod are the Twitter handles. Allison, welcome to the program. Tell us about your experience in the military that led you to the conclusion that this is really a big deal and America needs to be discussing it.
Hey, Tom, thank you for having me on. When the Alito decision leaked, overturning Roe, I was immediately transported back, and I think many people were in this country to, the time that they needed abortion care, or if they needed it, when they needed it. And for me, it was when I was in the military, when I was in the Navy in 1995. And a little bit of a content warning here for your listeners. I was drugged and I was raped, and that rape resulted in a pregnancy. And fortunately for me at the time, because Roe was in place, I could, in my spare time on the weekend, walk off base to the local Planned Parenthood to seek abortion care and also get a counseling referral. But if Roe is overturned, or even now, right today in Texas, where it's very difficult, if not impossible, to seek reproductive care. If you are on a military base, if you're an active duty service member and you become pregnant, regardless of how it happens, it's not so simple to just walk out the gate and seek that care. You would probably need to travel, but in order to travel, that's not very easy either. You need to have leave approved by 6 different supervisors, all the way up, oftentimes, to the commander of the base. And you need to express why you need that leave. Usually, leave is only granted for things like death in the immediate family. And so you would have to put that all on paper. And in my particular case, when I went to report this rape, and 43%, by the way, of people in the military have reported in 2018 that they had a very difficult time, a negative experience when they reported their rape. So there's really no safe place to report your rape, because it is the chain of command that makes the decision whether or not to prosecute. And they don't want, to acknowledge that they've had sexual assault on their command, on their unit. And so when I went to report, I was, to put it mildly, discouraged. Somebody came in. First, they asked me all the normal questions that people tend to get when they report a rape on a military base, which is whether I was drinking, or if I was flirting with the person, or if I was in a fight with my boyfriend. And then someone else came in and told me that if I filed a false report, I could be court-martialed, lose my school, lose my rate, lose my rank. I could be dishonorably discharged. They threatened to charge me with adultery because my rapist was married.
Whoa.
And so out of complete and total fear, I didn't say a word to anyone. And so without that safe space to report your rape, this could be a situation where the government forces women and people to carry pregnancy to term, and in some cases, their rapist's baby. So it hit me very hard, and I mean, this impacts so many more people. But this small slice, as you said, no one's talking about this.
Yeah. Now, there's kind of 2 issues here. One is the reporting of rapes and things like that. There was Kirsten Gillibrand has been all over this with the Military Justice Improvement Act. Although I understand that a Democratic senator from Rhode Island kind of blew that up. Do I have that right, or did he just move it and the Republicans blew it? What happened? What happened?
You're correct. We had 67 sponsors, 67 senators willing to vote for this bill. When can you ever get 67
enough to break
senators?
A filibuster?
And more than enough, right? And they brought it to the floor for unanimous consent. Which means, you can just pass it without having to do a vote and a roll call. And that unanimous consent was blocked by Jack Reed of Rhode Island. And his reasoning was that he wanted it to go through his committee and be put into the National Defense Authorization Act. There was a lot of pushback from Senators Kirsten Gillibrand, Joni Ernst, and many others, because they were afraid that it would be gutted. It would be, a lot of the provisions of the act would be removed. And that is exactly what happened. And so the Military Justice Improvement Act was baked into the National Defense Authorization Act. And the main part, the whole point of removing the decision to prosecute assault on base, taken out of the chain of command, was left in. And so we still don't have a safe and secure place to report assault and rape and sexual harassment in the military.
That's insane. That's absolutely insane. Now, that issue in and of itself is terrible enough. And I assume that Gillibrand and others are going to try and revisit this?
She has, and per her statement on what happened to the Military Justice Improvement Act in the NDAA, she has tried to bring that vote to the floor several times and been blocked each time.
So is there also, which is very unfortunate, is there also any legislation at all that would give service members access to abortion care in the event that they happen to be on base in a state that criminalizes it or doesn't allow it?
Well, no, not that I know of, and that would be unlikely because the Hyde Amendment prevents...
Which is attached to every single military appropriations bill.
Yes, and so what I am calling for from the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, and from President Biden is to approve leave for travel for reproductive health care.
Just that simple. Just make it very, this would routinely be available to women who have been
the leave should
who have an unwanted pregnancy. Let's say this would not be limited to rape, I'm assuming.
I would say no. In fact, it's absolutely inhumane and terrible that people that people in general, but also people in the United States military, would have to find workarounds such as that to have leave approved to travel. The military can't pay for that travel. Again, Hyde Amendment issues, and we can talk about trying to overturn the Hyde Amendment, but we can't get 50 senators to agree on much of anything. So that's, with the filibuster in place. So we're now forcing people to travel to seek that care. Some states are even looking to make it illegal to travel to seek reproductive health care, to seek abortion care. And of course, the federal government, his 12th Amendment supersedes that. But to have to come up with these end runs around this stripping us of our rights is bonkers. But they should be putting these things in place to automatically grant leave for healthcare travel.
We're talking with Allison Gill, the host of Mueller, She Wrote, the Mueller, She Wrote podcast and the Daily Beans podcast, MuellerSheWrote.com, DailyBeansPod.com. And Allison, we just have a minute or so left, but one of the points that you made in your piece in the Washington Post, titled "Overturning Roe would be disastrous for the U.S. military," was that even if women in the military try to get abortifacient drugs through the mail, and now telehealth has expanded and they're broadly available, I didn't realize how tightly the military monitors the mail. I mean, this could be problematic as well.
Yeah, in some commands, and it depends on the command too. Like basic training is extremely strict. They open up your care packages that mom sends to make sure that she didn't send you, cookies with special treats in them or anything. But when I was on Naval Nuclear Power Training Command out of boot camp, they still, would inspect the mail randomly just to make sure contraband wasn't coming in. Right. And they know where it's coming from. If it's from a pharmaceutical company, they're going to want to know what's in there. And for reasonable reasons, No,
I get it. I totally get it. So what do you think is the solution to this, Allison?
Again, they need to allow for those drugs to be mailed, for medicine to be mailed into the base, and they need to put in policy. And this is something that doesn't have to go through Congress. This can just be policy in the military that all abortion care-related travel is going to need to be approved.
And that, and if you're in a state, say you're in Texas, and say you're at one of the military bases in Texas, and you travel outside the state to get an abortion, and then somebody in Texas learns about it and decides to sue you and everybody involved. I guess they can't sue you, but or the woman who's getting the abortion. What does the military do about that? I mean, shouldn't there be some kind of firewall here, something that protects women?
There should be, and it should be a firewall akin to if you are born on a military base in England, it's United States territory, right? So that's federal territory, so that the policy should be that that doesn't apply. You're not considered a resident of Texas. You're considered an active duty service member, for example, and so that's what the workaround presumably would be for that, or for illegal travel out of a state that has banned it. Yeah,
Supreme Court fixing to create a whole big mess for us all here. Allison Gill, the host of Mueller, She Wrote podcast and the Daily Beans podcast, MuellerSheWrote.com, DailyBeans.com, pod.com. And her piece in the Washington Post, Overturning Roe would be disastrous for the U.S. military, is over there too. Allison, thank you for dropping by.
Thank you.
Good talking with you. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
18 minutes past the hour here in the place where smart people get their news. Back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Linda in Fresno, California. Hey, Linda, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Oh, hi, Tom. I was wondering if somebody can bring a lawsuit against, the KKK Act that Eric Swalwell's using against the insurrection, if they can bring that against Fox.
For incitement?
The KKK Act. The KKK Act.
Right. But they would use the KKK Act against Fox, arguing that Fox was inciting or helped incite the riot, or covered it up or something like that.
Yes.
I don't know. It is notoriously difficult to sue media organizations. I mean, you pretty much have to prove actual malice. You have to prove that they intended for the outcome, the terrible outcome to happen.
Yeah.
And I think that would be a big challenge, but it's an interesting question. I honestly don't know the answer, Linda, but keep asking, and I'll
there's one more thing. I don't know. I know you don't like to name websites and stuff, but this was on Pacman's show last night about unfoxmybox.com to get rid of Fox off like DirecTV and stuff.
Tell me about it.
I don't know if you have. Yeah, well, it's just you go to the website and you fill out your name and everything, and it just let Fox know that you don't want to contribute to them, getting any money. Pacman says we all pay $2 if we have DirecTV, about $20 a month to Fox unwillingly.
So the website is unfoxmybox.com?
Yes, correct.
Okay, I'll have to check it out. Linda, thanks for the tip on that. I'm off to learn about it. Dustin in Eagle Bend, Minnesota. Hey, Dustin, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's on your mind today?
I'd like to make a call on my representative, Michelle Fischbach. Apparently, you know how you were talking about the baby formula of how limited supplies on that?
Mm-hmm.
Well, apparently she's more for fertilizer. Last I checked, I'm going to say it like this. Fertilizer is a chemical. A baby's an actual human being. If you're going to drop costs for fertilizer, what's that going to do for the baby? It's not going to feed it. And
I am completely confused, Dustin. I'm sorry. I don't understand what you're saying. What am I missing here?
Okay, Michelle Fischbach voted against for regular baby food. She doesn't want to supply for
She was one of the Republicans who voted against the $28 million to restock the shelves with baby food or formula across the country.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So what does that have to do with fertilizer?
Well, she wants to lower the cost for fertilizer, and I'm like,
Oh, I'm assuming she represents
a
a rural area with a lot of farmers?
She represents our district in Minnesota, the 7th Congressional District of Minnesota. And babies are more important than fertilizer. It's basically, if you want, babies need food every day. And it doesn't matter. You need food every day.
Yeah.
From the way I understand it.
Yeah.
And babies need nutritional food that starts out as regular baby food.
Yeah, I'm not sure tying these two things together is necessarily the best way to go about it. I do think, though, that if she was one of the people who voted against restocking the shelves with baby formula, that's something that should be publicized far and wide, Dustin. And I encourage you to go ahead and do that. Thanks a lot for the report from rural Minnesota. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. Hey, just wanted to flag for you this amazing study that came out of the Department of Global Public Health at the University of Bergen in Norway. Lars Fadnes is the professor who oversaw it. They took a massive database of millions and millions of people all around the world, and the goal was to look at life expectancy. And they were looking at everything from pollution to wars to poverty to diet. And because there was so much data and such a large population base, they were able to separate out individual pieces. And what they found, and just looking at the diet piece of this, what they found was that going with what you and I might call the Mediterranean diet, they don't call it that in the study. What they basically say is no red meat, very little dairy, lots of fish, nuts, legumes as the principal protein sources, and lots and lots and lots of fresh fruits and veggies would add 10 years of lifespan to the typical 20-year-old and 8 years of lifespan to the typical 60-year-old. The whole video about it is over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Whoa, that's loud. And let's see here. We've got more stories to talk about, more news. CPAC, this is amazing. The Republicans are over in Hungary learning from Viktor Orban how to run a country. Viktor Orban, the guy who has turned the entire media, the entire country, basically, pretty much all of it, over to his billionaire cronies. The guy who has packed his court system with absolute toadies. The guy who has gerrymandered and voters suppressed the electorate to the point that pretty much any election he runs in, he's going to win. And guess what? They just blocked reporters from the Associated Press, from the New Yorker, from Vox Media, from Rolling Stone, from Vice News. They're now saying no American media can come in here. Right. And then Orban gets up and gives a speech this morning in which he says that 2024 is what we all need to be looking at. Now, keep in mind, this is the dictator of a foreign country telling Republicans that in 2024 they need to turn America into a dictatorship, just like Hungary. And they're all applauding him. Oh, yeah, Viktor Orban, he's our hero. Tucker Carlson went over and spent a whole week with him. Gave him a foot bath on live television. Well, not quite, but you get the point. This is what Orban said this morning. He said, progressive liberals, neo-Marxist, dazed by the woke dream people financed by George Soros, and promoters of open societies want to annihilate the Western way of life that you and I love so much. The Western way of life. I think he's talking about white people being in charge. That's been his big thing. He doesn't want any Jews in charge in Hungary. His main thing is George Soros, which is, just kind of generic international Jewish person. He said, we must coordinate the movement of our troops As we face a big test, 2024 will be a decisive year because, you see, if Orban and Putin can help the Republicans destroy democracy in the United States in 2024, the pressure's off them. Right now, we're the example to the world of how a functioning democracy can function. I mean, we're not necessarily the world's best example, but anyhow, Orban laid out 12 points that the Republicans need to do, and one of them was to seize control of the media. He said, quote, "We must reconquer the institutions in Washington, D.C. and Brussels." He wants to take the EU, too. All on behalf of his good friend Vlad, I'm sure. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Got a quick geeky science for you, and then I will pick up your calls on the other side of this break. We'll be right back.
Today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction, Chapter 1. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Richard Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter in American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America would face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through slush funds and bribes, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, like Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FPCA, groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted all around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of deja vu as the special counsel investigates whether the president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into a possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning, rather than the end, of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there's the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of America's political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate, the offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease U.S. sanctions against Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment of Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump business organization, the corporate interests of the Trump family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from this investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired 2 former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andres, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We've come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact it has must be contained overseas. If a corporation pays kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and the constant migration of peoples, goods, capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties, not to mention a reputation that will be associated with corruption and deceit. They also effectively steal the public's money, because the majority of bribery cases involve capital-intensive development in infrastructure projects such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by 10 or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the market at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. The book Kickback by David Montero. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
Have you noticed that people are basically imitating Donald Trump all over the country? We're seeing all this rude behavior, sexist, racist behavior. People getting arrested at airport gates, airplanes being turned around because people are fighting with flight attendants, disorderly, rude, unhinged conduct. I mean, it's just gone nuts. Car crashes are up, gun deaths are up, shootings are up. Healthcare workers are being literally physically assaulted in some hospitals. They're having to put together panic buttons. This kind of behavior in our schools is increasing. It looks like, according to some sociologists, psychologists, and even business consultants, it looks like a lot of this ties back not just to the Trump presidency, with Donald Trump providing us with an example of how to be, an obnoxious person, but also the crisis of the pandemic. We've got a deeper dive into this topic over at thomhartmann.com. There's a great video about it. You can check it out there. "35 minutes past the hour. Hey, a geeky science for you here. Scientists finally got around to doing a study on that 10,000 steps a day. I remember the big craze. I mean, it kind of came along with the Fitbit kind of stuff, the wearables, maybe a decade or so, and everybody was like, yeah, I got to have 10,000 steps a day. 10,000 sounds like a nice round number. It turns out it came from a marketing strategy put together by not a physician, but a marketing expert in Japan for a company that was selling these wearable, measure your footsteps things. And he just said, hey, let's do 10,000. It's a nice round number. Well, somebody put the science to it. They did this is just recently published in the Journal of the American Medical Association's Network Open Journal. They followed 2,110 middle-aged adults who had worn a step counting device beginning in 2005 or 2006 for at least 11 years. And they looked at how many steps they took and what their health outcomes were. And what they found was, any steps are good. 6,000 steps is better than 5,000. 5,000 is better than 4,000. No matter how many steps you take, there is a noticeable improvement. But it seems to peak out not at 10,000, but at around 7,000. 7,000 steps seems to be this important inflection point. And taking 7,000 steps a day reduced participants' chances of premature death by 50 to 70%. That's breathtaking. That's just absolutely breathtaking. So, anyway, picking up your phone calls. Got an awful lot going on here. And so Ziggy in Oneonta, New York. Hey, Ziggy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. I want to talk about the populism of free speech. And
you mean free speech, the concept, or free speech television, the network?
Oh, no, yeah, the concept, not the network. I'm sorry. Yeah, I guess that would be confusing. I hadn't thought of it that way. Thanks for the question.
It's all good, but since you're watching me on Free Speech Television Network, I thought maybe that had something to do with it. Okay, go ahead, Ziggy.
No, my brain is so much further away from that, but thanks. That's a good question. A week ago, a friend of mine asked me, how can both sides be populist? And I now realize that I gave him a half-wrong answer. Because the more I think about it, the other side is using free speech in a populist way, but they don't mean it as populism.
Right, that was my point. Ever since Reagan, the Republican Party has been lying about what their intentions are, what their goals are, and thus being pretend populists when in fact they are actual neo-fascists.
Yes, exactly. And I guess I'm coming to the same conclusion because it was, like I said a week ago when I was asked that question, and I realize now I gave a half-wrong answer because I said, both sides can be. And, it's like you learn, don't ever say both sides can be. It really doesn't work that way. But, it also brings me to one other point I wanted to bring along the line on this, and questioning now whether we should consider regulating language, not free speech, but language. Because
we already do.
I know you're going to say,
there are certain words you can't say on the air. There are certain things you can't advocate for.
Yeah, I realize that, but I think the other side is going much further down that slippery slope already, and we may have to.
I think we just need to remove the Section 230 provisions that say that you cannot hold social media companies accountable for what happens on their platforms. You can, if the Washington Post published an article that said, go out tomorrow and assassinate so-and-so, and so-and-so gets assassinated, the Washington Post would get their ass sued. But if that happens on Facebook or if it happens on Twitter, there actually is a law preventing any kind of liability, and which is one of the reasons why there's, these hundreds and hundreds of hardcore right-wing groups on Facebook, and I'm not sure that they have the analog of that on Twitter, but also on a whole bunch of other social media. This isn't just to single out Facebook. It's a systemic problem, but I think that's the way to do it. Ziggy, thanks for the call. Casey in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, Casey, what's on your mind today?
How you doing, Tom? Long time. Good to hear from you, buddy.
Thank you.
Let me take you off speaker. Hold on. My thing is, you've gone around in the past when I was, Dem exit, and I finally voted for Hillary and this other stuff. But I got to be honest with you, man. The Democratic Party will not leave off the baton to the newer Democratic generation. You know what I'm saying?
I think it's happening in a big way right now. I'm seeing a lot of young Democrats getting elected who are very progressive. And it's not just the squad. I mean, look at the average age of people in the progressive caucus in the Democratic Party. It's probably in the high 40s.
Well, let's look at Ron DeSantis. Even though the stuff he's passing isn't good stuff, he's at least given his base the meat that they want. Why isn't Democrats give us the meat that we want?
Because there's not enough progressive Democrats yet. The problem is that the Democratic Party took a neoliberal turn, along with the Republican Party, back in the 80s. Took it in a big way in the 90s with the Clinton administration. And now you've got, a sizable chunk of the Democratic Party that is, in order to get reelected every 2 years, is in the House anyway, is completely beholden to particular industries, whether it's like Kurt Schrader and Big Pharma, or somebody who's the insurance industry. Like Joe Lieberman used to be the insurance industry. I'm not sure who is now, but we're going to have to shake this stuff out. We're going to have to clean it out. But right now, there's not enough progressive Democrats to do the kind of we're going to do the will of the base stuff that DeSantis has been able to do in Florida, because he's got the state. I mean, you got the Republican Party has gone through the transformation. It's no longer just a middle of the road party.
But Americans. But the thing is, though, you're independent Americans that aren't engaged with politics and all this other stuff. That's not what they're. The thing is that they want results. So how are the independent Americans going to, vote for the Democrats when, first off, our message isn't getting across? I mean, it's like, I understand we're not a perfect, party. But the Tea Party hijacked the Republican Party. Now you got the MAGA movement. We have to hijack the Democratic Party. A third party is not going to work because it's going to split the vote. Now it's going to be still business.
You're singing my
usual.
song. You're singing my song, Tom. Casey, excuse me. You're absolutely singing my song, and it's why we all need to get involved. It's why we need to be supporting progressive candidates, and where appropriate in primaries, we need to be supporting progressive candidates because Joe Biden figured this out. He came before Joe Biden became president, he was Mr. in the middle. He was Mr. I'm from Delaware. I'm the guy who, supports banks and insurance companies. I mean, he was Mr. in the middle. And he came into office and he looked around and he said, the American people want stuff done. And we haven't been doing it for the better part of 30 or 40 years. And they want it done now. And so I'm going to do it. And he came up with Build Back Better. I mean, basically, Bernie wrote the legislation. The problem was we've got two Democrats, Sinema and Manchin, who are dancing with the billionaires and the right-wing corporations. We need more progressive Democrats. Casey, excuse me. That's really what it comes down to. And until we get that, we're hanging out in the wilderness here. Tom in Huntington Beach, California. Hey, Tom, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi. How you doing, Tom?
Good.
Listen, I just found out that Benjamin Franklin was very much an abortion advocate. He wrote a book in 1727 called The Poor Planter's Reader, which had things that every family should know, all kinds of herbal remedies, the alphabet, simple math, the seasons, planting, things like that. And what's amazing is Leto, in his opinion, said abortion has little or no traditions in America. So apparently his clerks didn't even find this book.
Right. Ben Franklin's book, by the way, has how to do an abortion. I mean, it's mostly herbs and things that are good for abortions. But yes, you're absolutely right.
It was called The Suppression of the Cessation of the Courses.
Yes. And the courses being menstruation, the suppression of the end of menstruation, which is a euphemism for pregnancy.
Right, exactly. So for Leto to say, it's like he was whitewashing it.
He's a Republican. He doesn't have to tell the truth. They're not going to hold him to account for lying through his teeth, even in a Supreme Court decision. Scalia did the same thing with the Heller decision on guns. He found some obscure tract from the 1770s from an anti-federalist guy who didn't want the Constitution to pass, doing a rant about guns, and that became the basis of the Heller decision. I mean, you're expecting rationality or coherency from these guys, Tom?
I hear you.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, thanks a lot for calling and pointing that out, though. I mentioned it the other day, but it really deserves to be highlighted. Ben Franklin, the only president of the United States who was never president of the United States, to quote the Firesign Theater, wrote a book about how to do abortions in the 1700s. Yes, indeed. 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You will recall, by the way, that they referred to him back then as Dr. Franklin. We'll be right back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Alain in Quebec, Canada. Hey, Alain, what's up?
Hello. Can you hear me?
I can. Am I pronouncing your name right?
Yes. Well,
Great.
Close enough.
Okay. Alain?
And yes.
Okay.
Okay, I'd like to talk to you about something that I've noticed. It's about your rant about the fascist movement in the United States and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed, because I have a lot of books and a lot of science fiction, history, and I've noticed that at this moment, it looks like the United States is at crossroad between a republic and an empire.
Mm-hmm.
And for that, I base myself on what happened with the Roman Empire, which, by the way, looks like was the inspiration for the United States at the beginning.
In part, yes.
Right
in
now,
large part, yes.
And what I see right now is about the same not criteria, but not even, but prerequisite or the condition to make the transfer.
Mm-hmm.
And for that, I based myself on a book I didn't have time to read, but the back of the book, it's The Evolution of Civilization by Carol Quigley.
Mm-hmm.
On the back, it says, Quigley defined a civilization as producing society with an instrument of expansion. A civilization decline is not inevitable, but occurs when its instrument of expansion is transformed into institution, that is, the transformation of social arrangement that meet the real social needs into social institutions serving their own purpose regardless of the real social needs.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's also a book called Mortal Republic about the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, and with a heavy emphasis on the fall. And forgive me for forgetting the name of the author, but he's been on the program, in fact. And his point was, again, you look at when the Roman emperors began putting their own wealth, their own power, and that of their friends and cronies above the health and safety and needs of the republic itself, that was the beginning of the end of the Roman Empire. And that end lasted for several hundred years, but as it continued to degenerate. But I think your point is well made, Elaine.
Yeah, because right now I see that you are at the crossroad.
Yeah.
And my guess is, depending on which way it's going to go, you're still at the point where you can choose. But at some point of time, you won't be able to choose. It's going to be like like the evolution of a star in astronomy. When the sun will exhaust its hydrogen,
mm-hmm.
the core will contract and the outer layer will expand. Well, this is what's going to happen with the United States. The core, which is the political base, will contract into the hand of very, very, very few people, and the territory and influence will expand to englobe a lot of things, probably Canada and England and stuff like that. It's a natural evolution, I guess.
Yeah. I think your analysis may be right, and it troubles and concerns me considerably. I'm just hopeful that y'all in Canada can hang on to things so that those of us in the United States who may need a place of refuge can come and visit. Elaine, thank you so much for the call. It's great to hear from you. We'll be right, and thanks for watching us on YouTube. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Hey, I've got a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Available wherever you find fine books. The recent killing of a young black man in Michigan, Patrick Loyola, who was, the police officer was sitting on his back and put a gun right to the back of his head and shot him, is just the latest example of police killing people out of traffic stops, and predominantly black people. 28% of the people who are killed in traffic stops are black, but African Americans are only 13% of our population. Police in the United States have killed nearly 600 people during traffic stops since 2017. Mapping Police Violence is the nonprofit that's been doing the work on this. About 10% just this year, about 10% of the 1,100 people killed by police this year have been killed at traffic stops. Dante Wright, Sandra Bland, Philando Castile, we know their names and we know their stories, but we're not doing enough to get this under control. Other countries tend not to have this problem. We need to do something now. There's a video about it over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. 9 minutes before the hour. Amy in Pico Rivera, California. Hey, Amy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to bring to light a kind of a misconception. A lot of people think, oh, I live in California. It's a blue state, so I don't have to worry about this Roe v. Wade thing because we're blue. We're going to take care of the women. But we're blue right now. We might not always be blue.
You were a red state 25, 30 years ago.
Exactly.
Ronald Reagan was your governor, for God's sake.
Exactly. That's my point. So I'm saying I want people in blue states to be fighting just as hard as everybody else because this is going to affect everyone. And say we do stay blue, but they enact a federal law that contradicts our state laws. The most restrictive restriction restricts you.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want people to not be complacent thinking that they're safe in a blue state.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, let's keep in mind that the big plan that the Republicans are bragging about right now is passing a nationwide abortion ban. That will happen in Congress, but it's another reason to, this is not the time to back off of politics. Thank you, Amy, for the call. Eileen in Columbus, Georgia. Hey, Eileen, what's on your mind today?
Hey, sir, how you doing?
I'm well.
This is my first time calling.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I love you. I think you're great.
Thanks.
You're really good at talking people off the ledge, and I'm sort of on the ledge here in Georgia. Raphael Warnock is an amazing man. He's been an amazing politician. Of course, without him, we wouldn't have Ketanji Jackson. But Herschel Walker is 1 point ahead of him.
Really? And you're polling there in Georgia?
Oh, yes.
Wow.
And it's very, very scary because he never talks. All he says in the ad is, I'm Herschel Walker and I approve this ad. And I believe that the GOP is taking advantage of a man who does have a mental illness, but he also has a severe history of violence. And, they're repeating some of his own lies against him, and he refuses to debate Reverend Warnock. And I don't know what it's going to take for Reverend Warnock to kind of fight back. He has beautiful ads with nice people, and I did this, and I believe insulin should be this, all the right things. But when this guy, he caught a football in 1984, that's really what it comes down to.
Right. I know.
But, I guess it concerns me a little bit that because you're so up on everything that you weren't aware he was polling so close.
I didn't know that, are those polls considered meaningful this far out? I mean, we're looking at an election 6 months down the road.
I don't know. That I don't know. And another point I just wanted to make is that I'm very excited that John Fetterman, because I believe he is a progressive, and I'm very excited that he got the nomination.
Yeah.
So that's one way to go.
I would say, Eileen, if you're looking for, and maybe you're not, but I mean, if you're looking for things that you can do to help Reverend Warnock beat this football star, Herschel Walker, it would be to do everything you can to support Stacey Abrams and her Fair Fight movement, because she is registering voters like there's no tomorrow.
I'm very involved in our local Democratic Party, and in fact, I just put an application for the state Democratic Party.
Yeah.
I've met her several times. She's absolutely fantastic and amazing.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to take people, and what that lady just said in California, you can't get complacent. And people, she had the election stolen from her last time. And it's going to take people who, I don't know, it's going to take those people and push them to the polls.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
I wish you the very best. Eileen, I got to move along. I want to get one more call in here before the end of the hour. Thank you for the call, though. Bill in St. Helens, Oregon. Bill, you got the last minute. What's up here in this hour?
Yeah. Hi, Tom. I hear horror stories when these military members, ex-military members call in. I don't understand. I did 26. First off,
you're not a woman.
No, there's incredibly powerful tools which anyone could use. Number one, An E3 can book an 06 if the E3 believes the 06 is violating the UCMJ in some relationship to them, or if they're
not if somebody in their chain of command doesn't want to go along with it.
No, Tom, it's not negotiable. I'm 26 years. Please don't tell me it's 26 years. Yes, I can book anybody if I have cause, if it's impacted me and they violated the UCMJ. There is no limit to the level I can go to. That's number one. Number two, the Navy, the Marines, and the Coast Guard have something called a request mask. This says I can go see the commanding officer and they cannot stop me. I have to go through the chain, but they can't stop me from seeing the commanding officer. Very powerful tool. I do not understand why these people aren't using these tools.
Okay. Well, I would suggest, Bill, you might want to reach out to some women in the military. Thanks a lot for the call. Up next, could another recession cause us to, well, what will it produce? What's going to be the result?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The hidden history of Big Brother in America, how the death of privacy and the rise of surveillance threaten us and our democracy, by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at HartmannReport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at Dinovite.com.
Our book for today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction, Chapter 1. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate Richard Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter in American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America would face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time that multinational corporations, through slush funds and bribes, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, like Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FPCA, groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted all around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of deja vu as the special counsel investigates whether the president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into a possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning, rather than the end, of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there's the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of America's political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate, the offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease U.S. sanctions against Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment of Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump business organization, the corporate interests of the Trump family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from this investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired 2 former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andres, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We have come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact it has must be contained overseas. If a corporation pays kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and the constant migration of peoples, goods, capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars in fines and penalties, not to mention a reputation that will be associated with corruption and deceit. They also effectively steal the public's money because the majority of bribery cases involve capital-intensive development and infrastructure projects such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by 10 or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the market at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. The book Kickback by David Montero.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the third hour of our program. The stock market is falling, or has been fairly steadily falling. In fact, let me just check the the S&P is up a little bit. The Dow is down 0.5 point. So I guess it's kind of bounced back from this morning. The NASDAQ is up a little bit, a little less than a point. but it's been a rout, shall we say. The market was down broadly. The S&P was down 19.5% earlier today. At 20%, when it goes down 20%, that's an official bear market. And, you know, we've talked many times on this program about what is causing this. We've got the supply chain issues coming out of China. We've got the bounce back. This is the inflation part of it. You've got the bounce back from what's going on with COVID, you know, the recovery from the COVID pandemic. I think the most important thing, though, that is driving the recession that we are entering right now, and make no mistake about it, we are entering a recession, is the Fed raising interest rates. The Fed had lowered interest rates back after the George W. Bush crash in 2008 and had pretty much kept them that way for, 12 years now? 14 years. And what happens with an economy, and again, I'm not an economist, but common sense here, is that when things are a certain way for a long time, everything kind of stabilizes around that. Buyers' expectations, people's use of credit, home buying and selling, just basically all of our economic activity tends to normalize or stabilize around what the new economic reality is, both short-term and long-term, but long-term in particular. And we've had incredibly low interest rates for nearly a generation now. And because inflation was kicking up and directly caused by, number one, Saudi Arabia refusing to increase oil production and the war in Ukraine cutting Russian oil production. So the price of oil is up. Oil, of course, affects the price of everything because things are transported with oil. Things are manufactured with oil. So number one, you've got that. Number two, you've got, as I said, the return of pent-up, pre-COVID demand. And number three, you've got supply chain issues because China didn't vaccinate their entire population, and now they're shutting down their ports to try to stop the spread of COVID, which I think is going to be a fool's errand. And so, we're seeing shortages. And then number four, and this has not yet started to bite, but all this hysteria around, and I don't mean hysteria to minimize it or to joke about it. It's serious. There's concern, let's say concern instead. All this concern around the baby formula situation, that virtually every Republican in the House of Representatives just voted not to appropriate $28 million, I believe it is, to provide young families with baby formula. All the Democrats voted, yes, let's do that. All the Republicans said no. Just like all the Republicans voted no on allowing the Department of Homeland Security to communicate with other intelligence agencies about white supremacist violence in the United States. John Thune, the Republican senator from South Dakota, just came out and said, it's not going to pass in the Senate. Forget it. We're good with white supremacist violence. Are you kidding? They're Republicans. Anyhow. So we've got all, forgive the digression there. So we've got all this stuff that is kind of hitting at once. It's a perfect economic storm. And then to make things even worse, you've got the Fed coming in and saying, oh, and by the way, we're going to induce a recession by lowering interest rates. So what is this going to do? I think that we're in for, over the short period of time, a really rough time here. Now, the good news, I suppose, is that generally speaking, recessions don't last more than 18 to 24 months. In fact, very often they last 12 months or less. So we may well be out of this in time for 2024. That is certainly what happened to Ronald Reagan. I mean, he had the worst recession since the Great Depression. After he lowered taxes radically, and then the economy bounced back. The economy, economies tend to bounce back. You can't stop them. But right now, there are some really big flags. The first one is the more subprime borrowers. These are people who are paying somewhat higher interest rates because their credit score sucks. People who buy houses and buy cars, they're referred to in the industry as subprime borrowers. The number of them, the percentage of them that are more than 60 days late has been steadily increasing now for the last month or two. And that should cause us, this is according to Equifax, that should cause us to sit up and take notice. That's a huge early indicator of what will then become a crash in both the housing market and the automobile market, which are major drivers of the economy. Then Moody Analytics just weighed in. Recession risks are high, uncomfortably high and rising, said the chief economist at Moody Analytics. Quote, for the economy to navigate without suffering a downturn, we need some very deft policymaking from the Fed and a bit of luck. Well, good luck on that. You've got a bunch of Republicans running the Fed, and, you know, hey, if the economy goes in the tank, that works to their benefit. Lloyd Blankfein, the former chairman or former CEO of Goldman Sachs, just came out and said there's a very, very high risk of a severe recession. The Wells Fargo president, Charlie Scharf, the CEO of Wells Fargo, just said, quote, there's no question, end quote, that the economy is heading into a recession. Ben Bernanke, who used to be the head of the Fed, came out and said, yeah, we are poised for stagflation. Now, that's where you have inflation combined with a recession, which is the worst of all worlds. This stuff is political poison. Let's be very clear about this. Republicans are gleeful right now. New house construction slowed in April, the last month for which we have numbers. That's a sign that the housing market is getting soft. And last month, mortgage demand, those numbers are a little more current, the number of people getting mortgages is down right now. So everybody's always talking about how hot, you know, rip-roaring hot the real estate market is. I'm telling you, if you're planning on selling a house, do it today. Because this market is going soft in a hurry. And of course, the thing that really drove the market down this week was Walmart showing, you know, a drop in sales and a substantial drop in profits. Their stock dropped 11%. This was the worst one-day loss in 35 years. Goldman Sachs says their second quarter economic growth is going to be 2.5% annually. That follows an unexpected contraction in the first 3 months of this year when the economy actually shrank 1.4%. And yet the Fed is still talking about, okay, the economy shrank 1.4% in the first quarter, but we're still going to make things worse. So what do we do? I mean, Netflix is announcing layoffs. Amazon just came out and said that they're overstaffed. Now, that might be part of their efforts to destroy unions, but frankly, I doubt it. So what do we do? How do, you know, where does this go? What does this mean? Well, frankly, number one, you know, if you're young, don't worry about it. The market will rebound. You know, just, and this, I don't mean to be offering investment advice. I'm terrible at that. But, you know, basically that's, Warren Buffett is out saying that right now. On the other hand, you know, if you are in need of cash or you're older and retiring, might be a good time to be in cash as much as possible. But I think the political consequences of this are really where we need to be paying attention. The Democrats need to get the message out that a large part of this inflation is caused by oil prices, which you can point the finger at Saudi Arabia for, and Donald Trump cutting the deal with Saudi Arabia. And again, if the tables were turned, if Barack Obama had cut a deal with Saudi Arabia to reduce oil supplies by 2.5 million barrels a day, and it was causing an increase in oil prices during the first years of the Trump administration, you can bet Donald Trump would have the words Barack Obama in every single sentence that involved the price of oil. Democrats need to do that, number one. Number two, we've got the Economic Policy Institute, EPI.org, I think is their website. But you could just Google, you know, Economic Policy Institute, has done some just great work showing that the majority of the driver of today's inflation, the majority of it, the most of what is driving inflation is corporations increasing prices to increase profits because they can, because of monopoly. We need to start talking about breaking up big monopolies. Another, great talking point for Democrats, put Republicans on the defensive. Are you really a fan of monopolies? Do you really want, basically 2 companies controlling most of the internet market in the United States? Do you really want 4 companies that control the entire baby food market in the United States, or baby formula, etc.? I think that there is a possibility to play this politically, but the Democrats need to get smart about it. And you and I do too.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So spread the word and get ready. Batten down the hatches. We'll be back. It's 17 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. David in Maple Grove, Minnesota. Hey, David. Thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to find out from you if the president could expand the size of the Supreme Court or create a new state, like divide Minnesota in half, or, make Puerto Rico a state or D.C. a state by executive order.
No. All of those things require Congress. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, it doesn't even require, arguably Republicans could filibuster it, but none of those things require a supermajority, to the best of my knowledge. Statehood, I might be wrong on that. There may be a provision with regard to statehood that requires more than a majority, but I don't recall that. So, but in any case, I'm quite certain that both of those things require action by Congress. So, David, sorry. Okay. Yeah.
Too bad. Yeah. Let's get some oil from Venezuela.
There you go. Yeah. Thanks a lot for the call. It's good talking to you. Mark in San Clemente. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I think there's a glimmer of hope these days because, we have some people like yourself, Professor Wolf, Amy Goodman over at Democracy Now!. There's a lot of programs, instead of the old days when it was Rush Limbaugh, yelling at everybody and carrying on. And Chris Hedges. And then don't forget Noam Chomsky. I mean, I was in college when I read, Manufacturing Consent, and he was young then. Yeah. And now he's to the point where he's like, you can't really, he slowed down and he's
in his
still
90s.
Speaks the truth.
But he's still kicking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was on this show, in fact, about 6 months ago, Sean? Thereabouts? Yeah.
Well, you know what you got to do is you guys ought to get together and do a road trip. Just like, do a. We
used to do that with Air America, It was me and Ron Reagan and Nancy and Randy Rhodes and Sam Cedar, we'd get out there and go from city to city and do a little performance, an hour or two on stage, and it was great fun. I think during pandemic times it's a little more difficult, but.
Well, you're bringing the knowledge to people. Democrats are working people, and if they're out there humping it every day, working. And they haven't got time to listen to programs like this during the day on YouTube. And I've become aware of it since I retired because I didn't have time. I was going 4:30 in the morning till 9 at night. Yeah. Get home and just crash out and get up at 4:30 and go again.
Sounds like my day.
Yeah. You're from Lansing, Michigan. I have a friend that's from there. They were in a band called The Plagues in Lansing, Michigan in the 60s. I guess they were very popular locally. Huh. And he talks about the plant that was right next to the high school that built the Fisher bodies.
Oh, yeah, the Fisher body plant, yeah.
Yeah.
That would have been near,
Lansing, Michigan, right?
Yeah, but I'm trying to remember the name of the high school. It was named after somebody.
You never heard of the Plagues, huh?
I have heard of the Plagues. I never heard them play, so it's. Oh. But yeah.
His name's Dr. Van Decker, and he's still playing to this day. He's an incredible composer.
God bless him. Well, tell him I said hi.
Yeah.
Okay.
You bet.
Mark, thanks a lot for the call.
You.
Yeah, good talking to you too. It's 21 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. At the bottom of the hour, we're going to check in with Kevin Kamps. I'll pick up your calls on the other side of this break, though. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. Back in 1981, the first year of the Reagan presidency, one of our two senators from Oregon here, Mark Hatfield, wrote an op-ed for the Oregon Territory newspaper about the new right, about this whole movement that had seized the Republican Party. And in it, he called them out for escalating nuclear arms, for opposing the Equal Rights Amendment, for opposing abortion, for supporting school prayer, and for their argument that if you weren't on their side, you were not patriotic. He also goes into a long rant about how they're exploiting religion for political purposes, and he thinks it's damaging Christianity as well as America. And then finally, he says, finally, persistent threats of racism lie directly below the surface of new right ideology. And then he goes into this whole rant about that. It's really extraordinary how, what Reagan was doing is coming back into vogue. I got a whole video about the whole thing over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. 22 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Picking up your calls. Mark in Portland. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind? Mark in Portland? Listening on Sirius XM? No Mark. Okay. Lee in Stillwater, Minnesota. Hey, Lee, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Yes, sir. Well, getting back to a half hour ago, you were talking about Alito and the abortion issue. Mm-hmm. And I just really am struck with the fact that the pro-choice movement, they talk as though women impregnate themselves, and really they ought to change it to the pro-responsibility movement, because there's more than one person, more than one female involved. The male is involved, and there's no reason why, if conservatives are so concerned about being responsible, then included in any kind of legislation should be a requirement that the male put up a $500,000 bail bond of some sort, because that woman is going to be responsible for the education and health, not only of herself, but of that child.
Yeah.
And then, secondly, I'd like to point out another hot one here that really, I'm sure will go over big with the Republicans, and that is that something like a third of all pregnancies end in a miscarriage. Well, according to
like
the Bible, women were created in the image of God, so God created women to have miscarriages. So God is every bit as much responsible for abortions, and maybe we should rethink this whole idea of in God we trust, because this God has turned out to be irresponsible.
Well, there's also places in the Bible where God causes abortions and threatens to cause abortions, and where some of the prophets and patriarchs have prayed for the abortion of the children of their enemies and things like that. And of course, the Passover is God killing the firstborn, which is kind of a post-birth abortion, I suppose. But it's
getting back
tough
to
stuff.
the idea of male responsibility. I think Congresswoman what's her name, Spire from California, that was involved in the
Jackie Spear.
Jackie Spear, yeah, she's proposing a requirement that a male put up $300,000 bail bond.
Oh, really?
And, yes. Yeah.
Oh, we got to get Jackie
on
the show to talk about that.
Yeah.
Representative Spear, excuse me. I don't mean to be disrespectful.
Yeah, Spear,
she has been on our program before. I'm a big fan of Jackie Spear. She was down there at. She was one of the people that didn't get killed when Jim Jones melted down.
Exactly. Yeah.
Her boss, in fact, she was working for. I'm forgetting his name now, but he was a member of Congress. Say Ryan? I think it was.
Ryan.
Yeah. Congressman Ryan, who was murdered by the Jim Jones people. So I mean, she's one smart cookie. Michael, Lee, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Spot on. Michael in Pensacola. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hey, how you doing?
Good. How's Florida?
I was calling because I don't know if this is subject matter for a possible book, or maybe the book has been written, but I was a kid born in late '55. And I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and the cynicism we had about the Kennedy assassination, about Vietnam, about Watergate and things like that. And then all of a sudden Reagan gets into office, and he has it from the reverse of that, where you can't trust government. Government is the problem. And it seems like we've been stuck in that spiral ever since.
We have. That was his declaration of neoliberalism, essentially, or anti-Americanism. Yeah.
Exactly. But I don't know if you can answer this. I don't know if it can be answered. But what can we do to restore faith of the American populace in this country itself? Because it seems like nobody believes in it.
We have to repeal neoliberalism, and I think step one is to get money out of politics. And the single agency that has inserted money into politics is the Supreme Court. So we've got to do something about Citizens United and the Supreme Court decisions that preceded it that allow bribery in our political system. If we could get bribery out of politics, then a whole lot of stuff would change for the better. But, you know, they just doubled down on it yesterday, so it's going to be a tough one. Michael, I got to run. Thank you.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Michael, you asked about a book about that. I wrote a book about it. It's called The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. It lays the whole thing out. We'll be right back. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Second, Race and Guns in a Fatally Unequal America by Carol Anderson. This is from the introduction. It was like a snuff film, that July 6th, 2016 live stream. Philando Castile sat in his car, buckled in, bleeding, dying. "Why did you shoot him, sir?" asked his fiancée, Diamond Reynolds, pain piercing her every word. Castile, who had been pulled over in a suburb of St. Paul, Minnesota, because his, quote, wide-set nose, end quote, supposedly resembled that of a robbery suspect, had been reaching for his ID, but in order to avoid any surprises, let the police officer know he had a gun with him, a legally permitted, right to carry concealed gun. That was all the cop needed to know. Officer Geronimo Yanez began shooting. Castile's death came just one day after Alton Sterling's down in Louisiana. He, too, was carrying a gun, which was not unusual in this right-to-carry state. Granted, Sterling had a felony conviction, so owning a firearm was for him illegal, but he had been robbed before and wanted protection. On July 5th, 2016, the Baton Rouge police received a 911 call that there was a man with a weapon threatening customers at a local convenience store. As officers rolled onto the scene, they saw Sterling sitting there selling CDs and DVDs, just as the store owner allowed him to do and indeed welcomed. The threatening man was not Sterling. In fact, there was no threatening man. It had been a prank call, but that didn't matter. Within a few minutes, police had thrown the black man down, pinned him to the asphalt, and then started yelling that Sterling had a gun. He did. It was in his pocket where he could hardly reach it, what with the officers squatting on both his legs and one arm. Nevertheless, the police began firing round after round into his prone body, point blank. Blood poured out of his chest, but not for long. Alton Sterling was dead. The back-to-back deaths of these two black men police had shot for carrying guns should have jolted into action the Second Amendment's staunchest advocate, the National Rifle Association. In 1995, for example, the organization's denunciations flew fast and furious when it contended that law enforcement not only overreacted, but went out of its way to kill gun owners. Angered by the deaths at the Branch Davidian compound in Waco, Texas, and the siege and firefight at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, both of which were sparked by federal agents serving warrants for weapons violations, Wayne LaPierre, the NRA's executive vice president, angrily wrote, quote, "If you have a badge, you have the government's go-ahead to harass, intimidate, and even murder law-abiding citizens," end quote. He further denounced cops as, quote, "jackbooted government thugs who have more power to take away our constitutional rights, break in our doors, seize our guns, destroy our property, and even injure or kill us." Nearly 2 decades later, that sentiment had not changed. This was evident when Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, who had refused to pay over $1 million in fees for grazing his cattle on public land, summoned his gun-toting, self-styled militiamen to battle with federal authorities to prevent the seizure of his herd for restitution. Richard Mack, a former recipient of the NRA's Law Enforcement Officer of the Year award, asserted, "If federal agents are going to start killing people, I'm sorry, but to show the world how ruthless these people are, women and children need to be placed in the front lines as human shields." Mack didn't flinch as he insisted, quote, "Women need to be the first ones shot. I would have put my own wife or daughter there on the front lines, and I would have been a screaming bloody murder to watch them die," end quote. Larry Pratt, a speaker at the NRA's 2014 National Convention, commenting on the fact that Bundy, quote, backed them, the Bureau of Land Management agents, down with automatic rifles and other deadly weaponry, proudly called that armed confrontation, quote, a proper, legitimate, lawful response to illegitimate, unlawful exercise of government power, particularly on the federal level, end quote. Yet how quickly the NRA's swagger disappeared when government agents gunned down Philando Castile and Alton Sterling for merely carrying guns. Sterling's death didn't even merit acknowledgement. As for Castile, the NRA broke its silence only after inordinate pressure from African-American members led the gun manufacturers' lobby to issue a tepid statement that the Second Amendment was applicable, quote, regardless of race, religion, or sexual orientation. When pressed further by many of its members to stand up for Castile, the often fierce organization demurred, saying it was, quote, important for the NRA not to comment while the investigation is ongoing. This situational silence did not go unnoticed. The NRA had not only loudly defended the rights of those at the Branch Davidian cult and at Ruby Ridge, men who had actually shot and killed members of law enforcement, but the organization had also doubled down on calling for more guns in the face of mass shootings in a public school in Newtown, Connecticut, and a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. Yet here, the guardian of the Second Amendment was now deliberately ignoring the inconvenient fact that black men had been killed for merely possessing a firearm. Where's the NRA? Asked journalist Hannah Kozlowska. Didn't Sterling and Philando Castile have Second Amendment rights too? David Graham in The Atlantic coolly observed that, quote, two shootings give a strong sense that the Second Amendment does not apply to black Americans the same way it does to white Americans, end quote. Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson wrote that he saw the old Jim Crow whites only sign plastered above the Second Amendment. The book, The Second, by Carol Anderson. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. Back during World War I under President Wilson, we had a windfall profits tax on war profiteers, essentially, of 95% above their normal profits. You were allowed to make your normal profits, but when you started making more than that, 95% tax on that income. President Franklin Roosevelt revisited the exact same thing, windfall profits tax, during World War II, saying he didn't want this war to produce any new war millionaires. During the Korean War, Dwight Eisenhower had a windfall profits tax. During the echo of the fall of the Shah of Iran, when all the Iranian oil was taken off the marketplace and the price spiked, President Ronald Reagan imposed a windfall profits tax on the oil and gas industry to stop exploitation of that. Now we have Senator Bernie Sanders in the Senate and Ed Markey as well along with him, and Representative Jamal Bowman in the House saying, let's do the same thing now. There's a whole video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. Check it out. Welcome back. On the line with us is our old buddy Kevin Kamps from Beyond Nuclear. He's the radioactive waste specialist there, beyondnuclear.org, of course, the website, and Beyond Nuclear, the Twitter handle. And Kevin, we've been talking for years about, you know, the impact, the consequences, the process of the whole Fukushima meltdown, and then the pollution of the Pacific Ocean. I understand there's some new news on this front.
Well, the Japanese government and Tokyo Electric Power Company, the culprits in the Fukushima nuclear catastrophe, have yet again said they mean it. They're going to dump, the figure is 1.5 million metric tons of highly radioactive wastewater into the ocean. So that converts to about 400 million gallons of highly radioactive wastewater. The tritium, radioactive hydrogen concentration in that wastewater, is astronomical, off the charts. They can't filter it out. And there's even other radioactive poisons in there: cesium, strontium, cobalt, it has been filtered to try to get rid of those other radioactive poisons, but they can't get it all. And so they're depending on this dilution in the ocean. But as my mentors, Dr. Rosalie Bertel, put it, dilution is not the solution to radioactive pollution. Michael Keegan with Don't Waste Michigan, dilution is a delusion. What about the reconcentration in the food chain? That's what's going to happen with the tritium. It's going to reconcentrate, bioaccumulate up the food chain.
So explain to our listeners what tritium is, what bioaccumulation is, and why these things may be of concern to Americans.
Tritium is artificially generated radioactive hydrogen. It comes from the nuclear reaction, and it is in this wastewater at astronomical concentrations. And it can go anywhere in the human body that hydrogen can go, which is everywhere in the human body, right down to the DNA molecule in every cell, tissue, and organ. And if it lodges in there, if you eat a radioactive fish that has radioactive hydrogen, tritium, in its flesh, you could incorporate it into your body. And it can do tremendous damage when it's in intimate contact with things like DNA molecules. And so I have spoken to a growing number of people who just in their personal lives have said, I've stopped eating seafood from the Pacific Ocean from what they know about the Fukushima catastrophe already. Well, here's the next shoe to drop, intentionally dumping 400 million gallons of tritiated radioactive wastewater into the ocean. They don't need to do it.
Why? What's their alternative?
They could simply store the wastewater for as long as tritium remains hazardous. Tritium's half-life is 12.3 years. You multiply by 10, 123 years, the tritium will have radioactively decayed and will be stable and won't be a hazard anymore. And the only reason they're doing this is because it's simple, it's easy, and it's the tragedy of the commons. The oceans are the public's problem, not Tokyo Electric's, not the Japanese government's, but other governments are rising up in protest. South Korea, China, Taiwan, Russia, and one would hope the United States, but unfortunately, whether under Trump or Biden, and Obama before that, it seems the U.S. is complicit in these bad ideas.
Right, because the nuclear industry has so much power in this country, and because the Supreme Court has said that industries can own politicians. Isn't that sweet? Yes. So are they continuing to produce tritium-contaminated water, or is this stuff, kind of left over from the disaster? And I'm assuming the one thing you didn't mention in terms of why they're doing this was cost. I would assume that storing that water is more expensive than dumping it.
You got it. Yeah, it's to save them money. And no, there's no more tritium being generated. It's tritium is generated in operating reactors, and that ended in March of 2011 when they exploded and melted down. But there's plenty of tritium in the wreckage of these reactors, and as they pour hundreds of tons of cooling water into these reactors on a daily basis to try to keep them cool, it picks up that tritium contamination.
And then and puts it into the wastewater.
Which has been stored, yeah.
Right, which is being stored so far. When are they anticipating doing this?
They said they will make the final decision in July, and then they will begin doing this next year. But the Japanese Federation of Fishing Cooperatives, the anti-nuclear movement of Japan, and the anti-nuclear movement of other countries, like in Taiwan, are saying, no, you don't. So the fight is still on.
Fascinating, fascinating. What is the state of the Fukushima reactors right now? Where are we at with all these?
It is still an ongoing catastrophe. You still have other flows of radioactive water into the ocean on a daily basis because they're not capturing everything. They built Fukushima in essentially a riverbed, and so that underground water flow continues, picks up contamination, and some of it flows into the ocean. They're very slowly still trying to figure out where the melted cores are. They've found maybe one of them, maybe two of them, but there are three of them, so they don't exactly know where all of the melted core is at, how deep into the earth it melted, is it sitting in groundwater, which would worsen that flow into the ocean. And they're, planning to take decades or longer before they dismantle these facilities, and so it's going to be a very long-term decommissioning project.
What has this done to TEPCO, the company that owned these reactors, and what has it done to nuclear power in Japan in general? I recall a conversation we had a few years ago that they were, radically scaling back their use of nuclear power. Have they bounced back from that? Have they gone back to nuclear power? Where is Japan at right now? Or is there a huge push for renewables, or are they going back to fossil fuels? What's happening there?
Mm-hmm. Well, Tokyo Electric has been largely exonerated by the Japanese government and not really been held to account. There have been a handful of Tokyo Electric executives who faced some legal jeopardy through the tremendous hard work and sacrifice of the victims and survivors of the catastrophe who spent years in court trying to get justice. The Japanese ruling party has been pro-nuclear since the 1950s, and they still are, despite what happened at Fukushima. But the Japanese people, their eyes are open now, and they've joined the anti-nuclear movement for the most part. So of 55 reactors operating on March 10th, 2011, at this point there are perhaps 10 or a dozen operating. All the rest have been stopped by the Japanese public, and their elected representatives have said, you're not restarting these reactors. That fight continues on as well. There is a tremendous effort to try to expand renewables, and even some members of the ruling party, even popular past prime ministers, have joined that movement. The opposition party is way behind renewables, so there's tremendous hope that Japan will switch to renewables. They have tremendous resources to do so.
Yeah, I would think. And finally, Kevin, how many Fukushima-style reactors that are just as vulnerable to melting down as what happened at Fukushima, how many of those are in the United States?
Well, there were at the most 3 dozen, and we're slowly shutting them down. So, Vermont Yankee in 2014 was a very tremendous grassroots victory, but we still have around 30 of these Fukushima twin designs or similar designs here in the United States. The biggest in the world is Fermi Unit 2 in Monroe County, Michigan, immediately next door to Fermi Unit 1 that had a meltdown in 1966. So even karmically, that's one to worry about.
Wow. Amazing times we live in here. Kevin Kamps with BeyondNuclear.org. Kevin, thanks a lot for dropping by today.
Thank you for having me, Tom.
Do appreciate the update. We'll be right back with more of the news of the day and your call. Well, specifically your calls on any of the stuff that we've been talking about. What do you think is going to happen with the economy? How are you watching politics play out? What are your thoughts on the word populist? Are Republicans starting to see through the perpetual lies?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And why do you think it is that nobody is reporting the fact that virtually all the Republicans in the House of Representatives just voted against baby food, baby formula? And welcome back. Mark in Long Beach, California. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
Oh, Mr. Hartmann, thank you for taking my call. I got 2 questions for you, okay?
Sure.
All right. Last week, only 49 senators voted to have a federal law for the abortion, and they needed 60 to break the filibuster. And if they had gotten the 60 votes and the House passed it and Biden signed it, it would have been a federal law to make abortion legal.
Right. It would have codified Roe v. Wade, essentially. Put it into law. Codified.
My question to you is, if it had passed and done everything like you said, could the Supreme Court still overturn it?
Yeah, they could. But it's unlikely. I mean, they would see what the court. It's about positives and negatives, Mark. What the court did in Roe v. Wade is they said, we found in the Constitution a positive factor here, this right to privacy, that we can apply to abortion. So we're finding in the Constitution something that we're applying to abortion. What the court is saying now is we no longer believe that that right to privacy exists in the Constitution, and therefore it can't be applied to abortion. So basically what they've done is they've said, the Constitution doesn't speak about abortion. pro or con. That's basically the position that the Supreme Court has taken. And therefore, some states can have pro-abortion laws, some states can have anti-abortion laws. It doesn't matter because abortion is not in the Constitution, to paraphrase Alito. So as a consequence of that, if a federal law is passed either banning or explicitly demanding that every state acknowledge the right to an abortion, the Supreme Court, since they've kind of shot their wad on this, I mean, they've used up all their ammunition. They have said at one time, yes, it's in the Constitution. Then they've said, no, it's not in the Constitution. And that's the most recent precedent, assuming that Alito's decision or some variation on it actually stands. Then they would not be in a position to say, we're going to strike down this law because of the Constitution. Am I making sense?
Yes. And the second question is, I'm 70. I think you're 70 or 69. I think 71. We're the same age. Oh, okay. If you don't want to answer this question on the air, it's okay. You won't hurt my feelings. All I wanted to ask you is, since you've been born, who has been your very favorite Democratic president?
At the time, it was not the case that it was Jimmy Carter, but it is now. I have so much respect for Jimmy Carter. Obviously, you said since I've been born. I mean, the Democratic president that I love dearly is Franklin Roosevelt, but he was dead before I was born.
Yes.
But I think Jimmy Carter is. I think history will show that Jimmy Carter was one of the best presidents of the 20th century. What do you think, Mark?
Well, am I right or wrong in saying this? I like Jimmy Carter. I voted for him. But because of inflation, that's what doomed his presidency. Am I right?
Yeah, but the inflation happened under Nixon and Ford, and he just inherited the tail end of it, the echo of it. It was it got kicked up in his last year because the Shah of Iran fell and Iran stopped exporting oil. You can't blame that inflation on Jimmy Carter, Mark.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the call. And if nothing else, Jimmy Carter has certainly shown us how to be a post-president. It's 48 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. Share the Thom Hartmann program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann program. Back in 2018, Pastor Dave Barnhart of the St. Juania United Methodist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, delivered a sermon that is worth revisiting. He said, "The unborn are a convenient group of people to advocate for. They never make demands of you. They are morally uncomplicated, unlike the incarcerated, addicted, or the chronically poor. They don't resent your condescension or complain that you're not politically correct. Unlike widows, they don't ask you to question patriarchy. Unlike orphans, they don't need money, education, or childcare. Unlike aliens, they don't bring all that racial, cultural, and religious baggage that you dislike. They allow you to feel good about yourself without any work at creating or maintaining relationships. And when they're born, you can forget about them, because they cease to be unborn. It's almost as if, by being born, they have died to you. You can love the unborn and advocate for them without substantially challenging your own wealth or power." The whole clip is over at thomhartmann.com. Check it out. And welcome back. Picking up your calls here, Lisa in St. Joe, Michigan. Hey, Lisa, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I just wanted to make a comment that the Democrats are horrible at messaging and always stay silent. I agree with you that oil prices affect everything that we buy.
We saw this in the 70s.
Yes, but this is the thing that these people don't understand. The oil prices are determined by the worldwide oil prices, and under Trump, there was a price war going on between Russia and the Saudis. It went down to $40. The U.S. companies could not compete at that. It wasn't worthwhile. They shut down production. 40 companies went bankrupt. It just wasn't profitable.
Yep.
When you shut down, you can't just all of a sudden turn on a spigot. It takes months of getting everything, maybe a year, to get everything up and running again. And we have a labor shortage on top of it. But the message is that this is Biden's fault. He shut down pipelines. The only thing that he shut down was the construction of a pipeline. This is all, it's a worldwide inflation. They really have got to start to get the message out of there. And on top of it, the Trump tariffs, the steel, which affects everything we build and buy, that added $1,000 to the cost of a vehicle. We get 1/3 of our lumber from Canada. He added tariffs to lumber. Now, I know Biden has reversed the European tariffs. I don't think he has reversed the China, but people, if we're going to bring jobs back to the states and not use China slave labor, our products are going to cost more. But in reality, our welfare costs should go down.
And our wages should go up.
Yeah, and people are just so, darn stupid. I just want to, everywhere on TV, has the Republicans come up with one solution on how to reduce inflation? Their winning message is increase the interest rate. Okay, great. So now these people that need to get a car will have to pay more, a home will cost more, their charge cards will cost more. So not only is everything higher because of the impact of oil, they want to raise interest rates. Right. I think it's an intentional to sabotage the economy. And every time I hear these people talk about, well, it's the economy, it's Biden's economy, let's tell some truth. And I don't know if this is true, Tom, and you may know, but I heard that Trump was so upset about the low oil prices, which means he didn't really care about middle American. He wanted the prices to go up. He went to the Saudis and asked them to stop the price war with Russia.
Oh, he did. Jared Kushner negotiated this deal, and the Saudis cut their production by 2.2 million barrels a day. And to this day, they haven't raised production back up. And when Biden came into office, he reached out to the Saudis and said, we would like you to raise production back up to reduce the price because demand is coming back online. And they said, A, no, we're not going to do it, and B, we're not going to take your phone call. They're still, Mohammed bin Salman, the guy who's running Saudi Arabia, is still refusing to talk to Biden. He gave $2 billion to Jared Kushner last month and $1 billion to Steve Mnuchin. He is just waiting for Republicans to take over, to take back Congress and the White House, so that, because he's pissed off because Democrats have been trying to hold him to account for murdering Jamal Khashoggi, the Washington Post columnist, and also for just the general misogyny and hate that goes on in Saudi Arabia and the famine that he has induced in Yemen.
Well, the other thing that Jared did is, in the agreement to get him to change the oil production, we would sell them arms.
Exactly.
And the whole economy.
And by the way, the Trump administration sold them arms over, in a way that is arguably against the law, over the objections of Congress.
And just one last comment. I think the Dow has been overvalued for years. They took the tax cut, did tax, increased it. It got up to an all-time high, everybody, all-time record high, 36,000, the Dow, 36,000 something, under Biden. And right now I think it's at 32,000 something. I really think that when it hits 30,000, that's where it should be. So you people thinking that that was going to continue forever, it was just funny money out there on the market.
No, it never does. And you're right. The Dow had been juiced. Most of it was juiced by companies buying back their own stocks, which used to be illegal. Reagan changed the rules on that. Yep. But companies buying back their own stocks have juiced the market just insanely. And, this is coming to an end. Lisa, thank you. All your points were brilliant. Very well made. Susan in Phoenix. Hey, Susan, we've got about a minute here until the end of the hour. What's up?
I have a couple ideas on the housing boom. And one of them is, instead of raising rates, because that only hurts the home buyer, is to have the investors who want to pay cash wait a month before they're allowed to put in a bid, allowing home buyers, the people, to be able to put their bid in first.
How about passing a law that says that foreign investors, not people who are here on green cards and stuff, but foreign investors cannot buy American real estate, residential real estate, and because I think it's like 1/7, some amazing amount of American real estate is owned by foreign investors. And that hedge funds can't own real estate. This is the other big problem right now, is we've got hedge funds buying up real estate and turning single-family homes into rental properties. And it's wiping things out.
Yes, when we were a kid, we used to buy I live near Canada. People would buy cottages over there. And I remember one of the guys saying they were not going to let Americans United States citizens buy property over there anymore.
Yep.
And if you own property,
you had to sell it. Yeah. I got to run, Susan. I'm sorry, but you're spot on. And we need to do something like that here in the United States. I don't know if Canada did it or not, but we need to do something like that here. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. Have a great afternoon. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same place.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More info at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy by Thom Hartmann. More information at all book outlets. Wild Alaskan Company, 100% sustainable wild-caught seafood delivered right to your door. More info at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. Cozy Earth, better sleep, better you. More info at cozyearth.com, promo code TOM. The latest views and opinions from U.S. politics and other fascinating subjects too, including cutting-edge science reports at hartmanreport.com. And Dinovite, a whole food supplement for your pet's immune system. More info at dinovite.com.
Bye.